Chapter 211, Interlude, Demonic Mist. Why did you bring me here? Diana shouted to no one as she cleaved through a twisted demon that was a monstrous amalgamation of rotten bone that emerged from limbs jutting out in the wrong directions and leaking pus. She dodged to the side to avoid a spray of blackened blood, and once the demon was lying dead on the ground, she bent down and absorbed the demonic chi within. Despite the monster's grotesque appearance, its chi was most delectable. If not for her need to maintain a careful balance in her soul between the water and demonic chi, she would allow herself to feast on the demonic chi from the corpse some more. Standing back up and sighing, she surveyed the barren landscape that went on forever. Below her feet was this hardened, dull gray sand, and there was nothing other than accursed monsters groaning as they hauled their deformed bodies across the land in search of their next meal. This is literal hell. Diana cursed as she shook the blood off her blade and sheathed it. Since arriving here a week ago, she had seen no signs of Neptune and had been left to roam this barren land and kill any monster that sought her out. It was a depressing, lonely, and mind-numbing experience. Diana missed Stella's smile and laughter, kinda coiling around her legs as she meditated, the fresh mountain air, and especially the morning sunshine. Here, there was none of that. Nobody to talk to except herself. There were no streams of water, bustling plant life, howling winds. It was as if this place was a null zone devoid of all the color and life that made existence so wonderful. It was a place where everything had been stripped, and only the barest bones remained. Diana wanted to go home. This sucks, Diana grumbled as she put up her hood and crossed her arms. She didn't even have the motivation to explore anymore. There was simply no point. The first few days, she had wandered, hoping to find something new, but that yearning for adventure had long passed. Her expectations had been tempered, and now she just wanted to leave. Not having fun. A neutral voice made Diana spin around in the sand. It's you, Diana pointed an accusing finger at Neptune, you have some explaining to do. Why did you dump me here without another word for a whole week? I was curious to see if you would go insane, Neptune said with a deadpan expression. What? Diana was taken aback. Insane? Why would she go insane? If anything, Neptune was the insane one here. If you went insane, there would be no point teaching or showing you anything. That is why I brought you here. Neptune gestured around, as I think you might have guessed, this is hell. The birthplace of your ancestors, the Reunite clan. What does me going insane have to do with that? Diana asked while keeping her cool and resisting the urge to try and stab the world walker in the face. Partly because she wasn't fooled by the relatively harmless-looking human skin suit the world walker was wearing and knew the monster within could snap her out of existence, and because she was genuinely interested in what Neptune had to say. Even if Diana was unable to ascend to the Star Core realm this time round, just a little bit of knowledge about her ancestors, the Reunite clan, would have made it worth it. Anything regarding bloodlines was supposed to be forbidden knowledge, after all. On that thought, Diana looked to the skies that were as dull as the sand below her feet and was surprised to see no sign of heaven's rage at Neptune's words. Fear not. I can speak however I wish down here, Neptune said, drawing Diana's attention again. Much like the void, hell is outside heaven's influence. So this really is hell. Diana muttered. Indeed, and I apologize. For needing to test you, Neptune said, although I smelled the Reunite clan on you, I had to verify with my own eyes that you could resist the madness this place brings. You smelled me. And what madness? Wait, can you start from the beginning? Diana asked while massaging her temples in frustration. I am terribly lost right now. What test? How are we in hell? What am I doing here? Relax, and let me explain. Imagine the heavens as a grand waterfall. Neptune raised their hands above their head and did a trickling down motion. Everything at the top is perfect and vibrant since the reality closest to heaven is built in its purest form. But as the heavenly chi trickles down the layers of creations, it becomes tainted. What makes the chi tainted? Diana asked. Cultivators take in the heavenly chi, cycle it within their souls, and alter it, changing the chi into something that slightly reflects them. Neptune explained, when the chi is eventually expelled, through attacks or other techniques, it will carry a hint of their negative emotions. Negative emotions, like if they are having a bad day. Neptune shook their head, deeper than that. Emotions that cling to your very soul. Betrayal from a loved one, death of a close friend, failure to surpass a bottleneck and accepting you have peaked, being humiliated in battle and forced to surrender. These negative emotions are so deep they leave the mind and fester in someone's soul. They are unforgettable negative life experiences that shape our very being and dictate how we will live our lives moving forward. I see, Diana said. So these deep negative emotions taint the chi we cultivate and then expel. Do these emotions affect the performance of our techniques as well? They can in both good and bad ways. A berserk-style technique would use these negative emotions as fuel, whereas a healer's light may become tainted with the darkness of their soul. So all this tainted chi and negativity, where does it all go? Diana asked. Neptune gestured at the endless sand. Once the chi becomes so tainted and corrupted that the heavens lose control, it gathers down here and creates a dull land filled with creatures twisted by the tainted chi. So the Ravina clan originated from this place. Ow, no. Diana had killed many monsters in the last week while wandering these lands, and none showed a hint of intelligence. Senseless rage and hunger were all that drove them, and the worst part was that Diana could relate to them. She felt those uncontrollable emotions when she surrendered herself to her demon form and let it take over. Which is why she kept her mind and emotions so in check. Neptune walked over and poked her in the chest. Your soul is a rare one. Evan's chi and the tainted demonic chi share the same space, yet you can maintain a fine balance between madness and sanity. That is what I brought you here to test, that line. Or if the line is undefined and weak, you are not fit to inherit the true demon blood of the Ravina clan, as it will drive you to irredeemable madness. Diana gulped, so I passed the test. Exceptionally so. Neptune said with the slightest smile, you have wandered this tainted land overflowing with demonic chi and without a source for water chi for a week and showed no sign of losing yourself. That is commendable control. Thanks. Diana scratched the back of her neck awkwardly at the praise. It felt weird to be commended for not being insane. Let's not waste any more time here. Neptune clicked their fingers, and everything changed. They were now floating out in the void and looking down at a large shard of glass housing a land covered in a swirling fog. Us world walkers cannot enter any realms, including these pocket realms formed by monarch cultivators. We can only siphon off a little ambient chi as we drift past. Neptune licked their lips, and that is when I came across the strangest tasting chi. It had a sort of rancid offness that was impossible to describe. It turns out that taste was due to the demonic chi festering in this place, and there is only one family throughout the 9 realms famed for controlling the type of demonic mist I can see from here. The Ravina clan. I don't know what's down there, but I'm sure it will benefit you as one of their kind. Are the Ravina clan still around? Diana asked as she squinted at the pocket realm below, because if so, I don't know how they will react if I bump into them down there. Rumor has it, the Ravina clan was massacred on the 3rd layer of creation more than a millennium ago. Neptune answered, but I can't answer your question for certain as we receive information in very abstract ways and tend to pay little attention to the affairs of the realms. How would the demise of a clan I've never seen affect my life in the void? They then narrowed their eyes at Diana, and with you appearing, clearly the Ravina clan has some stragglers spread throughout the layers. Do you know why they were massacred? Diana asked. Neptune shrugged in an oddly human manner. Don't know and don't really care. Clans rise and fall all the time. All it takes is angering the wrong person or faction, and a clan can be wiped out of existence in a single day. That is the reality you live in. Only the strongest survive. Diana bit her lip. Are there enemies awaiting me in the higher realms? Should I put more effort into hiding my appearance to avoid drawing the ire of a foe I didn't even know I had? Diana pondered as she felt concern rising within her mind. Being told your entire bloodline had been slaughtered by something capable of wiping out a whole clan on the 3rd layer of creation was a rather startling revelation for a soul fire realm cultivator on the 9th layer. It was like knowing the beast tide was on the horizon, but instead of beasts, it was a godlike being that could sneeze her out of existence. Diana shook her head. It was pointless to lament over such things as what could she do if she were to meet such a person or clan that wanted her dead. Neptune placed a hand on her shoulder. Have fun down there, they said into Diana's ear, sending a shiver down her spine, and get ready to say goodbye to your humanity. Why would I need to say goodbye to my humanity? Diana turned to look over her shoulder, but instead of seeing Neptune's totally neutral face, she saw a forest of swirling mist. She glanced around and realized she was standing on her own 2 feet on what appeared to be a stone ruin overgrown with moss and weeds. Well, this certainly isn't the void anymore. Diana thought as she tried to decide what to do next. The swirling fog around her felt oddly comforting, like the smell of home. In fact, it did remind her of her home, which had been overcast in a perpetual fog ever since she was born. I never found it weird that Ravenborn Peak was shrouded in permanent fog all year round and seemed to attract carnivorous ravens that perched on the leafless trees. But now that I think about it, since the Red Clothes claimed that peak as their home, there hasn't been a sign of the fog. Diana stopped spinning in circles and picked a direction that looked like a path through the forest. I wonder if that fog was created by an array built inside the house. Or was it due to my father's presence that the fog gathered? Diana didn't know the answers to her wandering thoughts, but anything to take her mind off the bizarre situation was ideal. After a few minutes of walking down the path lined with a dense forest on either side, Diana stopped. Something about the fog bothered her, so she took a moment to inspect it more closely. This fog is filled with an equal mixture of water and demonic chi. Diana murmured as she waved her hand through it. How is that possible? My demonic chi always reacted violently with my water chi, so I always cultivated and used them separately, keeping them at arm's length in my soul and never letting them interact with one another if I could help it. Feeling confused, she decided to sit down against a nearby tree. Why does cultivating while leaning on a tree feel like the only way to do it now? Diana grumbled as she straightened her back against its damp bark and closed her eyes. Slowly, she allowed the strange mist to enter her soul by breathing in a controlled rhythm, and even though she was deep within her own consciousness, she couldn't help but frown. This fog wasn't a simple mixture of water and demonic chi. It was its own type of chi, as if it were some sort of demonic mist chi. No matter how hard she tried, she could not separate the two into just water or demonic chi and fill up the separate halves of her soul. Yet bizarrely, her soul embraced the demonic mist chi as if it were a long-lost friend. She had always found her cultivation method to be slower due to cultivating two separate types of chi and keeping them apart. Yet now that she was cultivating this demonic mist, she felt her soul core filling so fast that it began to push out what she already had. Her skin began to feel sticky as pus, much like the stuff leaking from the demons she had slain in hell began to soak her clothes. Its pungent smell made her eyes water, but she pressed on. Hours passed, and she had long discarded the ruined clothes and began to fully embrace the changes. With her bare back against the tree and sitting on the cold stone, Diana had her eyes closed as she pulled in the demonic mist all around her, ensuring it carried away the impurities leaking from her body as she replaced the demonic and water chi for this superior demonic mist chi. Even her hair fell out at one point, but then it began to grow back, longer and more full of life than before. A few days passed, and Diana's soul core reached critical mass. It began to rapidly expand within her body, and she could feel the pressure of the heavens overhead taking interest. This is it, Diana hissed through gritted teeth, bring it on. Keeping her focus on trying to compress her rapidly expanding soul core into a star core, she gobbled down some lighting resistance fruit courtesy of Ashlock and prepared to feel the pain. The heavens did not disappoint as they rained down hell. The trees around Diana were set aflame and blasted to pieces as lightning bolts arced down from every direction and struck her body. Even with the fruit's power rippling across her skin and absorbing the impact, she still felt tempered by the heavens as if they were trying to tell her to quell her arrogance. Weeks passed as Diana braved the storm. Further impurities were purged from her body during this time, and her soul underwent drastic changes. The lightning helped her soul core get the explosive growth in power it needed to rapidly condense back down into a brand new star core. Looking within, she confirmed her star core had the demon mist affinity. Phew. Diana breathed out and slowly opened her eyes after an hour of pain. Is this what Neptune meant about discarding my humanity? Diana wondered as she inspected her nails, which were sharp as claws, and ran them through her new long black hair that ran down to her knees and had a strange blue tint. The demonic mist chi seems to have removed that careful balance I was always maintaining between my human and demon form. Diana ran her finger along her teeth and confirmed the fangs were there, just less pronounced than when she was in her demon form. Luckily, no horns seemed to have sprouted from her head yet, as that would be hard to hide. She summoned a mirror and confirmed she still looked mostly human with her gray eyes and normal face, so long as she didn't smile carelessly. So I'm some sort of hybrid between human and demon now. Diana clenched her back, and two majestic wings of raven feathers manifested from her shoulder blades. Demonic mist chi evaporated off the wings, giving them a menacing look. Flexing them a little, she felt better control over them than before. Wait, I wonder if I can fly freely with these now that I am in the star core realm. Standing up with a groan, Diana's spatial ring flashed as clothes appeared on her body. Since the last pair had been ruined by the sickly impurities, She chose to wear the other artifact gear she had purchased from the merchants back in Slimer that had later almost stamped her to death. Bastards, Diana muttered as she checked out her dark blue cargo trousers. There was a belt buckle that served as a great place to carry a dagger, and the white hoodie she wore was very comfortable while allowing great movement. Letting her hair hang loosely down her back, she looked around at the destruction and silently prayed for the trees that were sadly lost due to the lightning. From the ashes, I hope you grow anew, Diana said quietly. After her prayer, Diana spread her wings and leapt up into the air. Her star core hummed in her chest and sent pulses of power through her wings, and to her awe, she could stay floating in the air. Flapping them a few times to gain height, she surveyed the land and spotted the shadow of a giant stone structure within the distant mist. I wonder if that is where I can inherit the true demon blood of the Ravina clan that Neptune had mentioned earlier. Diana mused as she began gliding towards it, trailing demonic mist as she went. Chapter 212, Interlude, King of the Mudcloaks. All around Elder Margaret was a sea of chi-dense lava. Even with her fire affinity, the heat was nearly intolerable, and exhaustion racked every inch of her body, even down to her bones. But she had no choice but to press on. Keep going. You can't stop for more than a minute, Elder Brent called out from behind her. I refuse to forfeit my shoes. This is so monotonous, Elder Margaret lamented as she jumped from the small mound of rock to the next one a few meters away while keeping her head low to avoid being impaled by the many stalactites. Upon her landing, she almost slipped back and fell into the lava, which wouldn't be a death sentence but would certainly scorch her clothes. Glancing over her shoulder, she saw Elder Brent jump to the stone she had just been standing on and watched it slowly sink into the lava. Ever since they came down the stairs that the fire titan had been guarding, they had delved deeper and deeper through catacombs of molten rock. The caverns had started off small, but as they ventured deeper, they became more extensive and treacherous. Do you really think all this lava came from the body of a single dead fire titan? Elder Margaret asked Elder Brent as he used his sword to slice clean a stalactite of solidified fire chi connected to the ceiling way overhead. I would assume so, Elder Brent replied nonchalantly as he stowed the red rock away in his spatial ring. This place is a graveyard for those giant bastards, after all. Although the exploration had been dangerous, all their spatial rings were filled to the brim with strange fire chi flowers and figurative mountains of fire spirit stones. Of course, the hope for some kind of inheritance was at the back of Elder Margaret's mind. But they had gotten quite the haul already. There's a wisp near you, Elder Brent pointed behind her. Elder Margaret turned to see the fire wisp floating by. It was a small gas ball of pure fire chi. Reaching out, she grabbed it and pulled the wisp into her soul. My soul feels bloated with fire chi, Elder Margaret said as she ignited her sword with crimson flames. She then cut down a stalactite from overhead by lazily waving her sword. If your soul is nearing the point of forming a star core, do you want me to call the Grand Elder down here to pick us up? Elder Brent asked, and honestly, Elder Margaret couldn't think of anything better. Even if she wasn't quite ready to form her star core, she was both mentally and physically exhausted from being in these life-threatening caverns for the last 2 weeks. It was a little selfish of her as she should press on and gather more resources for the sect, but she didn't mind the idea of being whisked away back to the surface and not having to mine fire chi rock or collect flowers and wisps anymore. Yes, please, Elder Margaret said as she stowed away the rock. It was just her and Elder Brent down here. The Grand Elder was cultivating and guarding Elder Mo as he went through his Star Core ascension, which had started a few days ago, and Amber could not handle the heat down here. It's rather unfair that Elder Brent and I have been stuck down here. Although the fire wisps that float by more than make up for being unable to sit in one place and cultivate. These things are like even better versions of that fire fruit the patriarch grows from that tree. A few more floated by, drawing Elder Margaret's attention. She debated trying to absorb them but was somewhat worried about going over the edge and suddenly forming her star core right here deep underground and stuck in the middle of a sea of fire birthed from the death of a titan. Okay, he is on his way. Ouch, Elder Brent cried out. Quick jump, jump. Elder Margaret didn't think twice and leapt to the next floating rock with more grace this time. Are you alright, Elder Brent? She asked with concern and saw the enraged man looking down at his bare feet. The lava had claimed his shoes. Curse the 9 heavens. That was my 3rd pair. Elder Brent pointed his index finger at his feet and in a flash of silver light shoes identical to the last ones appeared. How does a man with such terrible taste in footwear have so many pairs of the exact same shoe? Elder Margaret thought as she rolled her eyes. Did some fool compliment him on them? So he went out and bought as many pairs as possible. Elder Margaret has seen many things throughout her long life, but Elder Brent's obsession with stupidly pointy shoes was something she would never understand. Let's keep jumping forward until the Grand Elder gets here. Elder Brent suggested, and Elder Margaret agreed. The two then spent the next 5 or so hours endlessly leaping forward. I hope he gets here soon. Elder Margaret thought as she felt her soul core overflowing. She had consumed one too many wisps and could probably start the process of forming her star core at any moment. Her prayers were answered as she saw a distinguished man on a sword of crimson flame effortlessly gliding over the lava with his hands clasped behind his back. Coming to a stop beside her, he gave her a smile. Elder Margaret. Grand Elder. She returned the smile. Is it time? The Grand Elder asked. I believe so. Elder Margaret gulped. Something she had been working toward for centuries was about to come to fruition. She would finally step out of the soul fire realm and become a person with a star core. Seeing all my closest family members reaching new heights. I never thought I would see the day. The Grand Elder sighed as he gestured to the back of his sword. Come, let me take you up so we may go through this process together. Hey. Elder Brent called out as Elder Margaret stepped onto the floating sword. What about me? Elder Brent, you have been slacking off in your cultivation, and I only have room for one. The Grand Elder said nonchalantly as he directed the sword to float away. I believe staying down here would do you and your cultivation some good. Don't disappoint me. You old dog, get back here. Elder Brent shouted, how will I get home? In 2 weeks, when the Mystic Realm ends, you will be pulled from here. I think. The Grand Elder waved behind him. See you then? Is it really all right to leave him down here? Elder Margaret asked over the distant shouts from Elder Brent. The Grand Elder turned to face her over his shoulder, and he was no longer smiling. His eyes were cold and distant. Grand Elder. Elder Margaret asked with a hint of concern, is something the matter? The Grand Elder turned back to face the front. Elder Brent is falling behind. His talent and desire for cultivation were always lower than the rest of us, and I fear the Ashlock sect will only remain gracious to him for so long. Once they fail to see any results. Elder Margaret furrowed her brows. What are you suggesting? It's a known fact that the immortal recovers his strength by consuming corpses. He has asked for monster corpses from us and even goes so far as to provide those fire chief fruit in exchange. The immortal entrusted Elder Brent to lead that expedition into the wilderness and return with subpar results. The Grand Elder's shoulders slumped. The Ashlock sect may have acted nonchalant about it, but if Elder Brent also returns from this round in the Mystic Realm without progressing a single stage, I wouldn't be surprised if the immortal started raising questions to his purpose. His purpose? Elder Margaret had an inkling of what the Grand Elder suggested, but she didn't want to believe it. Resources don't grow on trees. Alright, maybe they sort of do in this case, but you get the point. If Elder Brent continues to lack results, they will stop investing in him at best and at worst. What will they do? Elder Margaret pressed since the Grand Elder trailed off. Well, the immortal has also consumed the flesh of cultivators many times. I'm not saying he would do this, but what if he wanted to call back his investment? The Grand Elder shuddered. He may be a lazy bastard, but Elder Brent is still my brother. I don't want such a terrible end for a lifelong friend, so a bit of tough love is what he needs. A cold silence that starkly contrasted the bubbling hot environment grew between the two. Elder Margaret's thoughts drifted elsewhere as the dark molten caverns illuminated only by the veins of lava blurred past as they rocketed to the surface. What the Grand Elder said was a very usual outcome in other demonic sects and families. Survival of the fittest was a known way of life, and with limited cultivation resources, it makes sense for a family or sect to focus on raising up those that show the best results. But to Elder Margaret, the Ashlock sect seemed different. Stella put on a hard act, but behind that facade, she knew Stella was a kind person trying her best in a role that didn't suit her. That demon girl Diana was a bit of an enigma, though. Would the immortal really eat him for power? Elder Margaret eventually murmured as she could see the darkened sky of the Pocket Realm at the end of the tunnel. When I first encountered the Ashlock sect, I was almost eaten alive by their guardian beast and his thousands of spiders. If I didn't concede my soul to them and agree to the enslavement of my whole family, I would have been eaten under the cold gaze of Stella. The Grand Elder explained, to someone who can give access to endless pocket realms, grow fruit that can alter someone's birth-given spirit roots, and is even acquaintances with someone that could seemingly pause time at the snap of a finger. We are nothing. Our family only lives on because we provide some value to the immortal. Upon him finishing his musing, the duo reached the final cavern, and Elder Margaret could feel the whole world shaking as flashes of light illuminated the cave, followed by roaring thunder. Deciding to put the thoughts of Elder Brent being eaten alive by the immortal aside for now, Elder Margaret chose to ask, "How is Elder Mo doing?" "I think he will form his star core just fine," the Grand Elder replied as they exited the cavern and floated for a moment in the sky. Elder Margaret looked down and saw Elder Mo sitting in a circle of fire stones forming some sort of barrier. But even more impressive was a giant man made of spirit flames with Elder Mo's features lording over Elder Mo and taking the brunt of the lightning. "What is that?" Elder Margaret asked while pointing at the ghostly flames. "That's the manifestation of his spirit," the Grand Elder said as he lowered the floating sword far away from Elder Mo's spirit. "Fire may look like some offshoot affinity of our fire chi, but it's something totally different. It's closer to a spirit affinity. Hence, he can manifest his soul like that. I can't do that. I will be fine, though, right?" Elder Margaret asked as she jumped from the floating sword onto the molten ground. "And wouldn't it be better to do this underground? That way, I can hide from the lightning." "Stop worrying so much. You will be fine," the Grand Elder said as he stored his giant sword away and began walking around in a circle and placing heaps of fire spirit stones. "You could form your star core underground and behind 100 formations, but it means the formed star core will be far weaker than one tempered by the wrath of the heavens. With the immortal's help, the star core realm is simply another step for us. This is only the beginning, not the finish line." "I see." Elder Margaret mumbled over the roaring thunder and constant flashing from the lightning in the distance, striking down Elder Mo. "Now come and sit here," the Grand Elder gestured to the circle, and Elder Margaret complied by sitting down on the hot rock and crossing her legs. "My heart is pounding. Am I really about to form a star core? How painful is this going to be?" There's no easy way to say this, but being struck by lightning for 1 to 2 weeks straight is not a pleasant experience. The Grand Elder placed a fruit in her hand. This is a lightning resistance fruit courtesy of the immortal. It will help lessen the suffering. Elder Margaret bit into the tangy fruit, feeling even more worried. The Grand Elder must have seen her face because he crouched and looked straight into her eyes. "Stop overanalyzing everything and just go with the flow. I believe you won't fail. Have some faith in yourself." His intense gaze inspired belief in Elder Margaret, so she nodded. "Good." He stood up and clicked his fingers, causing all the fire spirit stones encircling her to ignite. "I will be waiting for your success, and if you do reach the star core realm, feel free to fly down into the caverns and save Elder Brent." With a chuckle, the Grand Elder vanished through the wall of flames, and Elder Margaret was left alone. Save Elder Brent. What a joke. Elder Margaret looked to the skies overhead, and as she flexed her soul core, she felt a sudden, intense gaze on her. "How can I save him when I'm unsure if I can save myself? As a cultivator, I live to defy the heavens." Elder Margaret gritted her teeth, and she saw a dark cloud rapidly form overhead and flashes of lightning. "So bring it on." Douglas strode through a grand tunnel built into the top of a mountain. A gem-encrusted crown weighed down on his head as he straightened out his spotless tailor-fit beige suit jacket. Surrounding him on all sides was an entourage of monsters. Yet rather than being hostile, they all gazed upon him with awe as they led him through his castle. He had been crowned their king a few hours ago after helping them defeat a tribe of vicious kobolds. It was clear from a glance these monsters were the prey in this pocket realm, as they were far weaker on average compared to all the monsters he encountered while wandering the Dragonite mines for a week or so. These monsters didn't know human speech but seemed to understand him somewhat. They were these spindly things with big glowing blue eyes but wore black cloaks to hide their hideous and weak forms. Since they had a strong affinity with the earth and could not tell him their names, Douglas had decided to call them mudcloaks. He was broken from inspecting his suit when one of the mudcloaks grabbed his finger with its 3 fingers ending in claws. "What is it?" he asked the mudcloak that hardly reached his knee. It made a happy shriek noise as it pointed out of a nook in the rock. Douglas crouched down as all the nooks were at mudcloak height. Through the hole, he saw a canyon far down below. They were surprisingly high up. In the distance, he saw the setting sun, making Douglas realize this was his last night in the pocket realm. It had been a wild month. His cultivation had skyrocketed. He had mined a fair amount of minerals, gotten some corpses for Ashlock, and ended up king of the mud cloaks. The mud cloak pointed down, and following its finger, he saw a giant turtle making its way along the winding pathway of the canyon. Why is it always a darn turtle? What about the turtle? He asked the mud cloak. Turtle. The mud cloak croaked out and clapped its hands. Yes. What about it? Give. You. The mud cloak replied in its terribly broken speech. This was currently Douglas's best student. A disappointment. You want to give me the turtle as a pet? Douglas asked. I will have to decline. I have a bad history with turtles. The mud cloak cackled as it pointed at the turtle again and shrieked, Kill, kill, kill. A sudden explosion went off, and the entire mountain shook. Douglas's eyes widened as something whizzed past the nook and smashed into the turtle far below. Once the dust settled, Douglas saw the massive turtle had been impaled by a giant crystal shard, and mudcloaks were emerging from holes in the rock face and dashing toward the corpse with axes thrice their size. The mudcloak turned to face him with its giant glowing eyes. Turtle tasty. Douglas just put his head in his hands and sighed. Why did this always happen when turtles were involved? Chapter 213, Reunited. Ashlock awoke to cloudy skies, a cold breeze, and the promise of rain. But that didn't bother him, as today was the end of the mystic realm. For once, he hadn't been entirely left out of the fun due to his new dimensional overlap skill letting him explore distant pocket realms as a tree, and he could even traverse them by floating around with Skyborn Bastion. I can't wait for them all to get back. Ashlock had been rather bored since Kaida went back into the mystic realm. Ideas on how to use Kaida's new abilities had occupied Ashlock's mind since, alongside his vain attempts at learning Warp Strike. Thankfully, the technique seemed more manageable to grasp than Spatial Lock, but it would still take him some time. Warp Strike aside, Ashlock was still amazed at how Kaida could use his ink chi to manifest a technique from a book into real life just by gaining heavenly insight from the ink. His affinity would be rather useless on Earth, where everything is digital. Ashlock chuckled as he imagined Kaida hissing angrily at a computer screen. Luckily, they were in an ancient-style world where the most profound scholars recorded their deepest insights in ink on parchment for the next generation of heaven-defying youngsters. We didn't get a chance to test so many things as I didn't want to hold back Kaida's cultivation just to sate my curiosity, but the potential of Kaida's ink affinity is near limitless. Ashlock mused as the sunlight snuck through the clouds and illuminated the dreary, quiet mountain peak. Like what if Kaida wrote 100 different techniques into the scales on his body and then, during a battle, activated them? Could he wipe out an entire army by himself with enough preparation? It was an exciting thought, but Ashlock also hoped for great things from the others. Stella should have grown in power, the Red Clothes might have gained something useful from down that staircase below the slain fire titan, and Diana and Elaine went off with Maple's siblings, so he had no idea what to expect from them. While waiting, Ashlock glanced at his sign-in system that had popped up to notify him of a new daily credit. It was weird to think that those daily credits had been so important back when he had been a sapling, but now they felt like a drop in the ocean. Idolatry daily sign-in system. Day, 3559. Daily credit, 7. Sacrifice credit, 2303. Sign in. 7 days have passed since I signed in for my SSS grade skill. So today should be the day. Ashlock paused as the sunlight hit the mystic realm fog, and it evaporated away like foam from a beer. Yeah, there we go. He caught the briefest glimpse of pocket realms vanishing, and if someone from his group was inside, they were deposited out. The first to appear were the Red Clothes. Elder Brent, who looked exhausted, turned to the Grand Elder wearing a smug grin and shouted at him. You bastard. Quiet, we are in the presence of the immortal. The Grand Elder berated him and turned to look at Ashlock. By the grace of the Ash-Fallen Sect, we have returned. You have done well, Grand Elder, Ashlock said within the man's mind with abyssal whispers while confused about their odd behavior. What had the Grand Elder done to Elder Brent? Just from passing his spiritual sight of the group, Ashlock could tell they had grown considerably in strength. However, since they were grouped together, he couldn't tell exactly how far they had grown, so Ashlock opened his demonic eye. It's essential I know exactly how strong everyone in my sect is, so in the future, I never send someone to complete a task above their capabilities. Ashlock mused as the sound of his trunk splitting open filled the mountain peak. Inspecting them one by one, Ashlock had mixed feelings. Grand Elder, You have improved by a single stage and now reside in the 6th stage of the Star Core realm. Ashlock was a little disappointed as he had hoped the Grand Elder would be closing in on the nascent soul realm a bit faster than this. Curious about why the Grand Elder was seemingly progressing slower than he expected, he asked, "Is there a reason for your slow progress?" The Grand Elder bowed his head. "I assisted Elder Margaret and Elder Mo with reaching the Star Core realm, and the chi density in the Pocket realm was a bit too low for me. But I must admit there is no justification for my slow progress." That is an acceptable reason," Ashlock replied as he shifted his gaze to Elder Margaret and Elder Mo. They had both reached the 1st stage of the Star Core realm. If the Grand Elder only went up 1 stage to get 2 elders to the Star Core realm, that was a win in his book. Deciding now was the perfect opportunity to implant a mental seed in his followers while they were all grouped before him. Ashlock used abyssal whispers on all of them. "Elder Margaret and Elder Mo, you have done well. The more Star Core elders we have, the better our chances against invading families from the Blood Lotus sect and the upcoming Beast Tide." The elders in question only seemed slightly perturbed under the influence of his demonic eye and his abyssal whispers. It made sense since he had spoken to Elder Margaret numerous times, and Elder Mo had an iron will. His gaze turned to Amber, who gulped, and Elder Brent, who was quivering and looking straight at the ground. "Sorry, just bear with it for a moment," Ashlock muttered to himself as he looked at both of them but then grew confused. Elder Brent was barely in the 9th stage of the Soul Fire realm, whereas Amber had caught up and was also in the 9th stage. How was Elder Brent's progress so slow compared to Amber's? Maybe he needed some encouragement. "Amber, you have done a great job, going up 2 whole stages," Ashlock said. "Your growth is commendable." The girl beamed a smile and threw herself into a bow. "Thank you for the high praise, Immortal." Ashlock then directed his demonic eye at the quivering elder beside Amber. "Elder Brent, your cultivation is lagging behind the others. I'm expecting good things from you, so make sure not to fall too far behind, alright?" "Why yes, Immortal," Elder Brent stammered as he dropped to one knee and bowed his head. "I will strive to improve." "Good," Ashlock replied as he saw the Grand Elder and Elder Margaret exchange a look of grave concern. There really must be something wrong with Elder Brent if they look this concerned. Ashlock mused, but he had no more time to analyze the red clothes as other people had arrived. "You are all dismissed," Ashlock said to the red clothes as he wanted some alone time with the others away from earshot, and the red clothes needed to regain control of the White Stone Palace as some youngsters had gotten rather rowdy. The red clothes gave him a final bow before 3 brought out large swords and hopped on. Amber got onto the back of the Grand Elder's sword while Elder Brent hopped onto Elder Margaret's. The 5 of them then rocketed toward the White Stone Palace in trails of crimson flame. "Tree!" Stella shouted as she ran out of the fog. "Look what I can do now." She vanished mid-stride as if something had deleted her from existence. Ashlock hadn't seen anything except the faintest ripple of spatial chi. Down here, Stella was perched casually on the bench below his canopy with a smug expression. "Ow. Did you learn how to use spatial step?" Ashlock asked in awe. That had looked like a very complex technique when he had glanced through the book. How had she learned it in a month by herself without the technique manual? "Sure did." Stella stretched out slothfully like a cat. "I'm exhausted, though. Too much cultivating and thinking." She then whispered, "Oh, and thank you for the guards. I was worried when I saw them that you would be in trouble all alone back here, but it seems nothing happened while we were gone. I was worried and didn't trust the Pocket realms anymore, so I might have gone a little overboard with the protection." Ashlock chuckled. "Luckily, it's been very quiet over here. No signs of Knox returning so far, and I haven't seen any rise of monsters nearby despite checking occasionally." Stella let out a sigh. "Well, that's good. So, any growth in your cultivation?" Ashlock asked as he looked at her with his demonic eye. Stella clicked her tongue. "Of course. Do you take me for a slacker? You are half asleep right now, aren't you?" "Ugh, fair." Stella pushed herself up and brought a lilac flame to her hand, 4th stage in the Star Core realm. Ashlock was speechless. "You grew by 3 whole stages. Only because I picked such a good Pocket realm the second time round." Stella waved him off while dispelling the flame. She then laid back on the bench while watching the rapidly shrinking Mystic Realm fog. That place was one massive chi-gathering formation filled to the brim with spatial chi. No matter how much I absorbed, more was always funneled into me, so it's no wonder my cultivation improved drastically. Now that she mentioned it, Ashlock recalled that the Pocket realm had been named Grand Spatial Array, and the chi had been listed in his system at the 4th stage of the Star Core realm. No wonder her cultivation skyrocketed. She basically found a jackpot realm specifically designed to speedrun a spatial cultivator to the 4th stage of the Star Core realm, and no further. Since the Pocket Realm's chi was at the 4th stage, if Stella were to go back there as a 4th stage Star Core cultivator, she would experience diminishing returns. A shame, but if they could find another realm like that next time but with higher stage chi, then her cultivation might skyrocket again. Diana. Stella suddenly called out and jumped to her feet while squinting at the dissipating fog. Ashlock turned his attention back to the fog and was surprised to see a familiar-looking woman staring face to face with Kaida, who had appeared from a pocket realm next to her. The two looked into one another's eyes briefly before Diana spread her arms, and Kaida rocketed into her embrace while hissing happily. Surprisingly, Diana wasn't knocked to the ground by Kaida's enthusiastic hug. She dug her heels into the stone and formed 2 small trenches with her heels as she was pushed back a meter. "Since when did you get so big and strong?" Diana grunted as she patted Kaida's large dragon-like head that rested on her shoulder. Stella used spatial step to appear beside Diana instantly. "I could ask you the same thing." She squinted at Diana suspiciously. Diana yelped, "Ah. Stella. What in the 9 realms, how did you do that?" "Not important." Stella waved her off. "What the hell happened to you?" Ashlock was also very curious. Diana now stood at an equal height to Stella when she had previously been almost a head shorter. Her usual short, tomboyish black hair was now lustrous with a blue tint and ran all the way down her back. She looked a little older with more defined features, especially in certain areas. If Ashlock had to summarize it, Diana had merged her demon and human form to find a middle ground. Diana grinned, showing off her fangs. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she teased as she burrowed her head into Kaida. Raven wings thrice her size sprouted from her back, and she moved them to obscure herself and Kaida from Stella. "Hey. Stop being shy and tell me." Stella tried to pull on the raven wing, but it was surprisingly strong and resisted her efforts. Stella blinked in surprise and then mumbled, "Did you reach the Star Core realm? How are you this strong?" Diana's wings suddenly spread out, and then, in a gust of mist, she propelled herself into the air like an angel of death. She flew around a bit before perching herself on Titus's shoulder and looking down at Stella. But Stella was gone. "So, tell me what happened," Stella said as she manifested, sitting beside Diana on Titus's shoulder and swinging her legs. "You're going to give me a heart attack if you keep doing that," Diana gave Stella a strained smile. "But if you insist." The answer isn't that exciting. Neptune threw me into hell for a week to fight demons, and then Neptune brought me to a pocket realm that supposedly belonged to my ancestors, which I shall not name to avoid being struck down by the heavens. Not interesting, my ass, you were thrown into hell. Stella's eyes widened. And how was it? Diana shrugged. I wouldn't recommend it for a vacation. Rather dull and full of demons. I see. Stella frowned. So, what happened after that? Well, I absorbed the chi in the place of my ancestors and realized the reason for my stunted progress, bottlenecks, and general issues. I haven't been cultivating my affinity. This whole time, I was cultivating water and demonic chi separately rather than together. Is that even possible? Stella tilted her head. Diana shrugged, apparently, but I wouldn't advise it. I was stuck in the soul fire realm for years, remember? And my body was racked with corruption. So why did you change into this? Stella asked while gesturing to Diana. Diana flashed a fang smile. It seems my wrong way of cultivating also stunted my physical growth. I was always rather short and underdeveloped for my age, but I just attributed that to my mother. But as you can see, that wasn't the truth at all. Now that I cultivate demonic mischi, I don't have to be so wary of my demonic bloodline and suppressing it all the time. Stella looked Diana up and down and smiled. Well, that's good. Glad to see you are yourself now. New. Stella and Diana exchanged a confused look and peeked down at the sudden shout. Ashlock followed the noise and saw Douglas kneeling on the floor, wearing a strange gemstone crown. Elaine was standing beside him and patting him on the shoulder. What's wrong? Elaine asked Douglas, who was staring at the ground before him. Douglas sighed, my minions. They were left behind. Minions. Elaine hugged his back, I must have been gone for too long. I don't remember you having any minions. It's only been a month, Elaine. Did you miss me that much? Douglas laughed as he held her hands. A month for you, A lifetime for me. Elaine casually replied as she escaped his grasp, ruffled his hair, and got off his back. Anyway, tell me about these minions, and what is this crude crown you got on? Douglas rose to his full height and faced her, then looked around in confusion. Why are there 3 of you? Chapter 214, Illusions. Ashlock wasn't sure what Douglas was on about as he freaked out. To him, Elaine stood with a mischievous smile before Douglas while the well-dressed man acted as if invisible people were clinging onto his arms as he stumbled back and tried to push them off. It was rather funny watching Douglas freaking out, but it also made Ashlock incredibly curious. What had happened to Elaine in such a short month for her to be able to do this? Unlike Diana, who had undergone a practical evolution, Elaine looked the same. So it must be something on the inside? Ashlock scrutinized Elaine with his demonic eye and tried to gaze into her soul but came up short. Rather than being able to peer through her skin and see the true power of her soul, he could see nothing. It was as if Elaine was nothing but a human-shaped void. Well, that confirms she still cultivates void chi, so what's with Douglas seeing hallucinations? Douglas looked to Elaine with his face flushed red. Elaine, make these other versions of you relax. Why are they crawling over me like this? Elaine pushed up her glasses with a grin. Interesting. What do you mean interesting? Douglas grumbled as he shivered. Elaine walked over and tapped the side of Douglas's head. The man glanced around and sighed in relief. Phew, they are gone. That was getting uncomfortable. You're the one who made it awkward for yourself. Elaine brushed her rose gold hair behind her ear as she stepped back. Ow. What was that? Douglas insisted. I would also like to know. Ashlock said to Elaine through abyssal whispers. She seemed entirely unbothered by his voice and illusions, which he found odd. Just a little trick, Elaine said as she opened her palm, and a translucent white flame flickered to life and then shifted between various colors like a rainbow. In the void, I was given a life-changing opportunity by Mars to overcome the curse upon my family. Curse? Douglas asked with concern. What curse? We thought our void mind family was cursed as nobody in our family had made it into the nascent soul realm. Elaine explained, but it turns out it's basically impossible to form a nascent soul out of void chi, so Mars suggested I take on another affinity to form one. Ashlock was glad to learn more about the supposed curse on the void mind family and was even more delighted to hear that Elaine could progress further. But the method Mars had suggested baffled him. He knew dual affinities existed. K-Nazir Crest was one such example, but he had no idea people could take on more affinities later in life. Stella manifested next to Elaine and squinted at the flame dancing in her palm. So, what affinity did you pick? Ashlock also wanted to know. He didn't know the choices Elaine had been given by Mars, but if he was given such a big decision, he wasn't sure what he would pick. Void would be a good choice, but Elaine already has void affinity, so what else is a good choice? Perhaps something easy to cultivate, like water chi, could be good. I can imagine a void tsunami being hard to survive. Ashlock got lost in thought for a moment but then realized what Elaine had done to Douglas was the likely answer. Some kind of mind control or mind-altering affinity. What a strange pick. For Ashlock, having a good offense was the best defense. So, if he could pick any affinity, he would choose the most destructive one, no matter its cost. Although I have a rather unfair advantage due to my biology and a literal forest of offspring providing me with far more chi than anyone else could access. You picked illusion affinity, didn't you? Douglas asked from the side. Elaine hesitantly nodded. Yes, I felt it suited me best, and it works very well with void chi, as you just experienced. It just came at a price. What price did you pay for a second affinity? Ashlock asked. If he knew what it cost, he could replicate it at some point. Everything. My soul was split in half, my cultivation was stripped, and then Mars put in a strand of my chosen affinity and stitched my soul back together around it. Elaine shuddered. So Mars ripped your soul in two and made you cultivate again from the start? Ashlock asked. With his mystic realms and immense cultivation resources, that didn't seem such a steep price to pay. Oh, also, Mars was only able to do it because of my void affinity, Elaine added and shut down Ashlock's dreams. One thing still bugged Ashlock, though. How could Elaine regain her cultivation in a month without his cultivation resources? How long did it take to recover your cultivation? I have no clue how much time passed as the void works in a strange way. It could have been centuries or only days. We sometimes went to the celestial fog to cultivate ambient illusion chi, And then Mars taught me this technique since it's apparently close to something world walkers are biologically capable of. So that's what an illusion technique feels like? Douglas massaged his temples. It felt so real and vivid, and my mind still feels cold. Is that normal? Also, are you still the same Elaine I knew if your soul was remade like that? Yes, of course, I am still me, and that numbness should go away in a few minutes, Elaine hummed to herself. Mars told me that usually, a person's illusion chi has to overpower their target defenses, but by tapping the side of your head, I could skip your body's defenses and insert the illusion straight into your mind by using void chi. Terrifying, Diana said as she touched down beside Elaine and withdrew her wings while drenching the area in demonic mist. I wonder if that World Walker-inspired technique would work on me, considering my demonic chi. I can try it on you if you want, Elaine said sheepishly as she turned to face the demon and then blinked. You look different. Diana smiled, showing a hint of her fangs. You think so? You look like a true mist demon now. Elaine gave a strained smile as she placed her finger next to Diana's ear. Ready? Sure, just don't destroy my brain out of revenge, please. Elaine laughed. Don't worry. I only use void chi to bypass the chi around your skull. I then insert illusion chi carrying a suggestion that your brain interprets in its own way. Elaine withdrew her hand. There. Done. Diana's eyes widened. I didn't even feel anything or have a chance to fight back. She glanced around. I can see multiple versions of you sneaking around in the corner of my vision, holding swords and staring me down. Why is Diana's illusion of you so much different to mine? Douglas grumbled, and that made Elaine laugh again. Because the illusion only carries a suggestion, this is to make it as undetectable as possible. The more I try to influence someone's mind, the more likely a person's subconscious mind will notice something is off and rebel against the illusion. Elaine explained, so it seems you want me to crawl over you, whereas Diana wants to hunt or fight me. Douglas stammered as he adjusted his suit jacket and cleared his throat. Ooh. That sounds fun, do me? Stella jumped in front of Elaine. Sure. Elaine tapped the side of Stella's head. There you go. Ashlock was impressed at how such a casual touch on someone's head invoked such a powerful technique. No matter who it was, seeing many versions of someone else during a fight would be incredibly distracting, and if Elaine learned how to use Void Step, she would be able to get that close to people easily. Stella glanced around. This is crazy. There's 100 perfect copies of you kneeling in a circle around me. Elaine, can they tell you apart from the illusions? Ashlock asked. Even if they could, these illusions can serve a purpose in battle. But then he would need to make sure an Ent or someone guarded Elaine in fights, as the best way to deal with a summoner or illusionist is to target the source. Well, let's test it out. I didn't get a chance to experiment with its capabilities alone in the void, Elaine replied. Stella, close your eyes and reel in your spiritual sense for a moment. I want to test something. Okay, Stella did as instructed, and Ashlock watched Elaine walk in a half circle and then kneel on the floor. Obviously, Ashlock couldn't see the illusion that Stella was seeing, but even under his demonic eye, Elaine was like a ghost. Opening her eyes and looking around, Stella spun on her heel. She glanced past Elaine and pointed in the opposite direction of her to a random spot on the floor. Is that you? Elaine stood up. No, I am over here. Ah. Stella spun around with surprise written on her face. That is so weird. Void chi has always been nearly impossible to detect, so the fact Stella couldn't detect you makes sense, Ashlock said, but that is still very impressive. Can you cast illusions without touching people's heads, Elaine? Not yet. Elaine shook her head. I only have this one technique for now. I will need to go source some others and meditate on some other ideas I had. Well, I have a grove filled with Dreamweaver orchids that produce illusion chi, so feel free to use that to further your cultivation. Actually, on that point, what is your cultivation level now? I can't tell due to the void chi. 6th stage of the Soul Fire realm, Elaine sighed. I'm still behind everyone, but Mars helped me increase my cultivation faster than I have ever experienced. What? 6th stage already? Douglas patted Elaine on the shoulder with a genuine smile. I barely reached the 8th stage, so you have almost caught up with me. It was good to know Douglas had grown by 2 stages, but it was far more impressive that Elaine had jumped up 6 stages. You should reach Star Core by the end of the year after another 2 Mystic Realm visits, Ashlock said excitedly. What outstanding progress and great choice of a second affinity. You will definitely be a pillar of the Ashfolin sect in the future once your powers have grown some more. Elaine looked at the floor and seemed embarrassed as she leaned into Douglas. Thank you, Patriarch. I will continue to work hard. Why is it fighting back? A sudden shout drew everyone's attention. In the middle of the mountain peak near the giant hole that led down to the cavern was Diana, seemingly fighting an invisible enemy. Fighting back. I didn't know they could do that, Elaine admitted. Seemingly just as surprised as Diana. Tell me what's happening. This is helpful knowledge to know. Diana looked over her shoulder and shouted, My mind genuinely sees the fake version of you as a threat. I instinctively dodge their void-coded attacks even when I know they aren't real. Diana seemed to sense danger and dove to the side while counterattacking with a swing of her hand. Only when I thoroughly attack them and convince my brain they aren't real do they disappear. All the other illusions become a little more obvious when this happens. Diana spun around and looked straight at Elaine. For example, I can't tell which of you is real now. Fascinating, Elaine said as she summoned a hand-sized piece of parchment and began jotting down notes with an ink pen. It would seem your subconscious mind becomes more aware of my trick the more you disrupt my illusions. Yeah, that sounds about right, Diana replied as she spun on her heel to dodge an invisible attack. Pretty good for practicing actual combat, though, assuming they attack you. Diana laughed. I don't think Stella will get much out of it with them all just kneeling to her. Being worshipped like this is tiring in its own way. Stella snapped at Diana but had a grin on her face. She teleported over and rested a hand on Elaine's shoulder. Hey, can you free me from this torment? Sure, Elaine said as she flicked the side of Stella's head. Stella squinted at Elaine. Did you have to flick me? No, Your Highness, but you deserved it, Elaine replied nonchalantly. Ashlock laughed as Stella scowled. It must feel weird for Elaine to learn how others viewed her. Of course, he didn't know what suggestion Elaine's illusion she had carried, but it seemed to be something along the lines of how do you view me or what would you do with me? I broke free from it. Diana shouted triumphantly as her claws retracted into her hands, and her majestic wings disappeared. After killing 10 of you, the rest faded away. I don't know how I feel about that choice of wording, but that's good to know, Elaine grumbled as she scratched it down on the parchment in her hand. So we now know my illusions are different depending on the person. For Diana and Douglas, they would cause issues during a fight, whereas Stella would be a more difficult target. Stella looked smug as she crossed her arms. I would only become even more motivated to fight with such an audience. I could still hide among the crowd and ram a sword through your back as you passed me, Elaine pointed out, making Stella pause and frown. Anyway, my illusion she aside. Elaine turned to Douglas. I still want to hear the story behind that crown. Is it an artifact? You got that from a pocket realm, right? Can I research it? Whoa, hold your horses, lady. There's not much to research as I know all about it, and that's no way to speak to the king of the Mudcloaks. Douglas summoned his ornate walking stick made from a brown gemstone stalactite and tried to look majestic. The who? Elaine tilted her head. Mudcloaks. That's a rather stupid-sounding name. It's what I named them, Douglas grumbled under his breath. I miss them already. Ashlock hadn't visited Douglas during the Mystic Realm but knew the man had been dumped into a mine. Were these Mudcloaks the natives of that Dragonite mine? Douglas, could you tell me more about the Dragonite mines and these Mudcloaks? Ashlock asked, and the man immediately straightened up and gobbled down a Mind Fortress pill. Douglas leaned on his walking stick with one hand and adjusted the crude gemstone-encrusted stone crown with his other. I obtained this crown after I helped these small native monsters that were weak but smart and competent with Earth Chi techniques kill an invasive species. Since they could not speak my language, I decided to name them Mudcloaks because of the funny black cloaks they wore to hide their bodies that were so thin it was as if they were nothing but skeletons. What can the crown do? Elaine asked while on her tiptoes and inspecting the crown on Douglas's head. It allows me to communicate telepathically with the Mudcloaks and rally them to my location, Douglas shrugged. Not much use out here, though. No, hold on, Ashlock brought up his dimensional overlap menu. Scrolling through, he found the Dragonite mines Douglas had been in. If Douglas could call them to him, then there was a chance they could bring the Mudcloaks back to Red Vine Peak through a dimensional overlap. Chapter 215, The King's Call. Since Ashlock was no longer in the Mystic Realm, the cost to use dimensional overlap was no longer free if he wanted to try and bring these Mudcloaks back to Red Vine Peak. It would cost him. I might have a way to bring these Mudcloaks here so long as them flocking to you due to the crown is true, Ashlock explained to Douglas, and the man seemed surprised. However, it comes at a cost on my part, so I need you to confirm if these mud cloaks are worth the price. You said they were well versed in earth chi techniques, and you were able to communicate with them. Would there be a purpose to bringing them back here? Ashlock could always butcher these monsters and turn them into ints if needed. However, he found the idea of intelligent monsters fascinating as he didn't even know that was possible. He had always assumed monsters were unintelligent beasts that only knew one thing: slaughter, so he had no qualms with feasting on their corpses to fuel his cultivation. But now, he wasn't so sure. Douglas hesitated. Patriarch, if I am being honest with ya, I can't give a definite answer as I'd only been their king for like a few hours and was only just starting to understand them when I was pulled back here. I see, Ashlock pondered. However, I can give you my opinion, Douglas continued. The mud cloaks are a weak race of monsters but showcased almost human-like intellect. Within a short time, I was able to teach them a few human words, and they showed some evidence of civilization, such as having a crown like this, and they also lived in a stronghold carved into the rock. Ashlock listened to Douglas's words intently. It seemed these monsters were sort of like monkeys. Maybe even more intelligent. If that were the case, it could be interesting to try and bring them back here, but the last thing he wanted was these mud cloaks to be feral and murder someone when he wasn't looking. They were monsters, and the fact they were intelligent monsters made them all the more dangerous. What about their hunting methods? Ashlock asked since Douglas had specified they were a weak race, so they likely didn't use claws or teeth to hunt. Did they throw rocks or bury their foes alive with earth affinity? Douglas stroked his chin. They mostly ate a specific type of moss that grew throughout their stronghold. However, I did watch them attempt to fight the kobolds that were like feral dogs which had invaded their home, and the mud cloaks actually tried to control golems to fight and, of course, collapsing tunnels and making pits with earthen spikes. Golems. Have you ever tried to make them before? Ashlock asked. To his recollection, he had never seen Douglas walk around with an entourage of golems. Douglas shrugged. Not really. I mean, what purpose do they serve? Anything a golem can do, I can do better for less chi myself. Creating and maintaining a being made entirely from stone and my chi takes a great toll on my mind and soul. That was a fair point. Considering how weak the mud cloaks sounded, golems might be helpful to them. But for Douglas, they were rather useless. However, that brought up a concern. If these mud cloaks were so weak they could do nothing without golems, what purpose could they serve other than simple labor as golem masters? If that's all they could do, then turning them into ints and letting Douglas command them directly would remove a lot of headaches from trying to train them. Bringing these mud cloaks back for nothing but labor seems counterintuitive. I would much rather hunt for some earth affinity monsters among that horde Elder Brent encountered and turn them into ints for you, Douglas. Ashlock said, is there anything you can think of that would make bringing the mud cloaks here worth the cost and risk of sharing our home with monsters? Well, other than the moss, they did have one other thing they loved eating, Douglas shuddered, earning the interest of everyone else listening in on the conversation. What was it? Elaine asked. They seemed to find these giant turtles delicious and would hunt them via a giant cannon that impaled those lumbering beasts with a 20-meter-tall crystal spear. Douglas explained to Elaine, I didn't get a chance to actually see the cannon, but I did watch them kill a turtle in one shot that shook the entire mountain, and then they descended upon its corpse like vultures. Stella patted Douglas on the shoulder. I love them already. Pardon. Douglas furrowed his brows at Stella. You definitely should have led with that. Ashlock chuckled. Obviously, the mud cloaks could be a potential source of labor for the Ashfallen Sect, with Douglas apparently being their newly crowned king and able to communicate with them. But that wasn't a selling point worth the risk and cost. However, monsters that knew how to build such advanced-sounding weaponry that could impale monsters with a spear of crystal that long. Now, that was something he was very interested in. Some freshly raised ints would never be capable of anything that advanced, even if ordered. So, are we going to try bringing them back? Douglas asked, breaking Ashlock from his thoughts. I think they would be a massive help if they assist me with my work. They had decent skills and showed enough intelligence to learn. I could totally train them up. He grumbled, not to mention they would be way better than those useless rogue cultivators I hired for the white stone pavilions. That was true. It was weird, but Ashlock would feel safer having weak monsters around than rogue cultivators. There would be far less chance of sensitive info being leaked or betrayals. Humans were greedy creatures. Wait, can I even make the monsters recite an oath to the heavens for loyalty if they can't speak? Ashlock mused but decided that wasn't too important if it was impossible. The monsters were either trainable and trustworthy or would serve as ints for Douglas. By Douglas's description of them, I'm imagining mud goblins. I wonder what they will actually be like. Ashlock turned to his system to check on his credits. Idolatry daily sign-in system. Day, 3,559. Daily credit, 7. Sacrifice credit, 2,303. Sign-in. Plenty of credits to spend, so wasting a few on this should be fine. Ashlock decided to go through with it and looked back at the dimensional overlap menu. Let's see. It says it will cost 100 sacrificial credits to establish the connection for the smallest area and then another 10 credits for every minute that passes. That's not too bad. Let's increase the size to encompass the entire mountain peak to give us the best chance. 550 credits. Pretty reasonable. I think we should bring them over, Stella said as she wandered in circles and glanced around. This place needs so much done, and weren't we going to build rooms inside the mountain? That's far too much work for Douglas to handle alone. Douglas seemed baffled by Stella's words as his jaw hung open. What? Stella raised a brow at him while crossing her arms. I just didn't expect you to stand up for me. Douglas scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. I thought you found me annoying. Stella waved him off. I was trying to make it sound more reasonable to Tree. My interest in the mud cloaks is entirely selfish. I think I will have a much easier time conversing with these monsters and getting them to do what I want than with any humans. Oh. Douglas sighed. I see. That does make some sense. Right? Stella nodded in agreement. So Tree, are we going to try and win them over? Yeah, we can give it a go, Ashlock said through abyssal whispers to everyone present. Get ready. I'm about to transport most of the mountain peak to the Dragonite mines. I'm unsure what to expect or if this will even work, so be prepared. Once everyone had their weapons drawn and ready, Ashlock hit the button and saw 550 credits vanish from his balance. A bubble rapidly expanded outward, twisting space as it went. The air suddenly became hot as if it were the peak of summer, and the world took on a beige hue, much like Douglas's suit, due to the overwhelming amount of earth chi within the bubble. The last time he used dimensional overlap, he had summoned a spatial bubble that barely surrounded his trunk, but this time, at great cost, the entire mountain peak had been encompassed. Ashlock looked to the east, where the mountain peak would usually taper off into a steep slope of demonic trees and then into the endless meadows of the wilderness backed by a blue sky. However, that was all gone. What greeted him at the edge of the bubble instead of demonic trees was now a sheer cliff face of red rock that carved slightly into the bubble and then went up and out of view. The same thing occurred on the western side of the mountain peak, which suggested to Ashlock that his dimensional overlap skill had placed them at the bottom of a canyon. Douglas cautiously approached the western side and placed his hand on the cliff face. Brown flames erupted down his arm as he closed his eyes in concentration. Everyone stayed quiet as they waited for Douglas's verdict. A while passed before he stepped back with a frown. It's strange. It's as if this cliff face has been cut off, and all that lies beyond it is Red Vine Peak. That was new. When Ashlock had last used dimensional overlap, there hadn't been any terrain. It had simply been a bubble of spatial chi. If he looked to the north and south, through the beige hue of the bubble, he could vaguely make out the tips of some trees. Try and make a tunnel through it, Ashlock said. Douglas nodded and put his palm back on the dusty red rock. A moment later, it rippled as if it had turned to a watery clay, and then it easily melted away to form a tunnel, which Douglas then walked through. Ashlock's vision blurred as he used his roots, still firmly planted in the mountain of Red Vine Peak, to gaze upon the giant bubble of earth chi from the outside. It was as if a snow globe filled with swamp water had encompassed the entire peak, and through the murkiness of the earth chi, he could vaguely make out the shadows of the two cliff faces and his towering body dominating the center. From the shadow of the closest cliff face, Douglas emerged through the murky bubble and glanced around in confusion. Don't worry, this is what I expected, Ashlock told Douglas, head back inside. Oh, all right. Douglas said to the sky as he took a moment to admire the enormous bubble of earth chi before tracing his steps and vanishing back into the looming shadow of the cliff. With him gone, Ashlock took a moment to ponder this discovery. Since dimensional overlap was supposed to be a combat ability focused on altering the environment to a desired chi type to give himself and his allies an advantage, it made sense that terrain could also be brought in. So much swirling earth chi alone would make Douglas a tough opponent to face, but if he also had piles of rock on either side of him to manipulate into golems or to use as projectiles, that would make him even more formidable. Ashlock now wondered what would happen if he had made the size of the dimensional overlap even bigger. Would it encompass more of the canyon? Or would the overlap have picked a different location? How does the dimensional overlap skill even choose where to put me? Is there a way I could select to appear in the middle of the Mudcloak's stronghold? Or perhaps in the middle of the Azure Clan's library? Ashlock hadn't seen any such option in the menu, so it seemed safe to assume it was randomized, or he would always appear in the same place. I should revisit this pocket realm with dimensional overlap later and see where it puts me. Done with his inspection and confirming the skill had functioned like last time despite the added terrain, Ashlock's vision blurred as he returned his sights to inside the bubble. The fact that Douglas's chi seemed to stop at the boundary of the bubble and could only affect the bit of canyon inside made Ashlock concerned that the crown might not work at all. And even if it does work, I'm unsure if the Mudcloaks can see, interact, or enter this bubble. But the fact there's a bit of mountain in here gives me some hope. Ashlock would be rather annoyed if this turned out to be a total waste of credits, but at least he got some new knowledge about one of his S-grade skills. Knowing that terrain can appear is essential to my future decision-making regarding the skill. For example, Soul wouldn't benefit much from terrain with his light affinity, so I could go for a cheaper and smaller overlap. In contrast, Earth affinity is rather useless without stone lying around. Patriarch, Douglas said respectfully, which broke Ashlock out of his musings. Should I activate the crown and try and call the Mudcloaks here? Yeah, go ahead. Douglas straightened his back and placed both hands on his brown gemstone walking stick, firmly placed into a notch in the stone at his feet. Brown soul fire swirled around his form as he looked into the distance. A wind rustled his black cloak of minor concealment casually draped from his shoulders, and the crude gemstone crown on his head began to glow with power. Mudcloaks, he said with his chest, and his voice thundered out, "Your king calls you." The crown on his head lit up like a beacon, and Ashlock felt a wave of power roll out and phase through the bubble. Nothing happened for a while, and Ashlock grew concerned that he had wasted his credits. However, his patience was soon rewarded when a single head poked through the bubble at the top of the cliff. It was a tiny thing with giant glowing eyes resembling blue orbs. A baggy black cloak with a deep hood obscured the rest of its face and body. "King." It cackled with a high-pitched voice and pointed at Douglas excitedly with its spindly finger that emerged from the folds of its cloak. Many other Mudcloaks emerged beside it, and more appeared on the eastern cliff face. Soon, they were being stared down by dozens of Mudcloaks, all pointing at Douglas and shouting, "King." With excitement. It would seem the Mudcloaks answered their king's call. Chapter 216, New Friends. Both Red Rock mountain cliffs were soon bustling with so many Mudcloaks that the ones on the edge struggled not to fall. Bits of rubble and loose stone under their feet rained down as the ones at the front attempted to hold back the surge. The excited chorus of shouts from the Mudcloaks as they tried to push their way toward the beacon that was their king was deafening, and Ashlock was starting to wonder where he would even put them all, assuming he could bring them back. There must be 1,000 of them, Ashlock mused as he inspected them through his spiritual sight and noted that the general strength of these little guys was less than Douglas. The average seemed to be around the first stage of the Soul Fire realm. There was also no way to tell their age or gender as they were all around 3 feet tall and wore the same tattered black cloaks with only their glowing blue eyes within their large hoods as defining features. A sudden shriek drew Ashlock's focus to a Mudcloak pushed off the eastern cliff and plummeting to the ground while flailing its limbs. Before it hit the ground, Stella manifested below with spatial step and caught the little guy in her arms. "Whoa there," Stella said as she carefully set the still screaming Mudcloak on the ground. Only once its feet were on the ground did it stop flailing around. It looked around and then up at Stella with its glowing eyes and joyfully squealed. "What an odd creature," Stella laughed and looked at Douglas. "Why does it remind me of you?" Douglas clicked his tongue. "Funny. I can see the resemblance." Elaine nodded seriously as she crouched down to inspect the Mudcloak that was busy looking up at Stella as if she were some divine being. "Since when did you team up with Stella?" Douglas grumbled as power flowed through his walking stick, making the ground tremble. With a twist of the walking stick as if it were the key to a door, the ground began to rise into a slope that met the top of the cliff. Due to the trembling, a few more Mudcloaks lost their footing. Ashlock and Stella created portals to catch them, but due to the dense earth chi swirling around, they required more chi than usual and were unstable. So dimensional overlap can actually be disadvantageous to me, Ashlock noted as he saw a few Mudcloaks tumble down the freshly raised slope like pandas. Good to remember and means it's probably best used in unison with progeny dominion so I don't weaken myself when fighting within a different type of chi. Perhaps in revenge due to the earlier remarks from the girls, Douglas raised himself up on a thin pillar of stone above the mudcloaks to avoid being swarmed while leaving Stella and Elaine down below. Diana spread her wings, grabbed Kaida under his arms, and hoisted him into the sky. Which looked rather funny due to how big Kaida had gotten, and the lindworm hissed happily in Diana's embrace from above. Can you shrink your size? Diana grunted as her wings flapped and emitted demonic mist. You're too heavy like this. Kaida hissed as his long tail, draped down to the ground like a rope from a helicopter, began to retract into his body. It reminded Ashlock of watching rainfall on a window in reverse as Kaida's ink tail rippled upwards. His torso and legs also shrunk, and within a few moments, he was more manageable to hold like a large dog. I guess Kaida pulled the ink making up his body and is storing it in his soul. Ashlock hadn't realized having your body made entirely out of a chi type would have such an advantage. Considering he isn't getting any smaller means his star core must have reached maximum capacity. So there is a limit. Stella became swarmed by excited mudcloaks, but surprisingly, she didn't seem bothered as she crouched down, shook their hands, and entertained them. My name is Stella, she told them seriously, I am your friend. Friend. They cheered. Stella is friend. While chanting, they ran around Stella in circles and began handing her moss clumps as friendship offerings. Ashlock had to admit these mudcloaks were far different from what he had expected. They seemed pretty harmless and were even quite funny. It also helped that they could be taught language, as shown by them repeating Stella's name. I wonder what would happen if I gave them a language comprehension fruit. Ashlock mused. Stella gathered the moss offerings and stowed most away in her spatial ring, as there was simply too much for her to carry. Meanwhile, Elaine was dutifully studying the mudcloaks before her and even tried to gently pull back one of their cloak hoods to see what they looked like underneath. But the mudcloak quickly pulled down their hood and ran away while howling. They also ran from me when I tried to get a better look. Stella laughed as both women stood up and conversed away from the mudcloaks swarming around them. They are fascinating monsters, though. Elaine replied, I wonder why they seem so friendly. We don't even have the crown. Yeah, it's strange. Although they are rather shy, Stella agreed as she held up some moss. They handed me a lot of moss. Elaine took the clump of moss and inspected it. This must be the moss that Douglas mentioned earlier. She brushed her fingers through it, and tiny glowing blue spores flaked off. I suppose this is the source of their glowing eyes if this is all they eat. It was all fascinating, but Ashlock was expending 10 credits a minute to keep this pocket realm open, so he decided to hurry things along. One thing that he had noticed since the mudcloaks arrived, and it was growing stronger the more they appeared, was a faint connection to them. Which Ashlock found odd. How could he feel a link to monsters he had never met until just now? Pulling on that faint link, Ashlock soon found the source, Douglas. The chain of loyalty wrapped around Douglas's soul that bound him to the Ashfullen sect, and ultimately, Ashlock was extended to those under his rule. Does this mean Douglas is like a noble with his own people, and I'm the king? If Douglas is loyal to me and the mudcloaks are loyal to him, that means the mudcloaks are also devoted to me via Douglas as a proxy. This was great news. So long as Douglas retained the crown and ruled over the mudcloaks, there should be no issues. Are the mudcloaks so friendly to the other Ashfullen sect members because of this? Ashlock wondered but had no idea. Diana wasn't bound to him through any oaths, and they didn't seem too fussed about trying to hurl pebbles at her. Douglas, they seem loyal to me through your oath to the Ashfullen sect, Ashlock informed their king as he stood on his pedestal. Although the connection is far weaker and relies on you. So you better not die or lose that crown. Yes, Patriarch, I will make sure to never betray the trust they placed in me as their king, Douglas said earnestly as he gulped another Mind Fortress fruit. Even with his increase in cultivation, it would seem that the illusions caused by abyssal whispers were still far too much for the man. Ashlock was just glad to finally have a labor force. He had been overworking Douglas simply because he had warranted trust issues with random rogue cultivators working too close to him. What should we do now? Douglas asked, are we taking them back to Red Vine Peak? I fear if I leave them here unattended in the mines, they will be attacked and killed before I can see them again. Didn't you wipe out the kobolds that were their predator? Ashlock asked. Douglas nodded, that I did. But there were more tribes deeper in the mountains. In fact, I believe that is why they gave me this crown in the first place. They entrusted me to protect them. I see. Well, we can try and bring them back, Ashlock replied. Honestly, I have no idea what will happen if I collapse the bubble. There's a good chance they are sent back to the Dragonite mines. So what should we do? Douglas had concern written on his face as he looked over the crowd of 1,000 mudcloaks shouting, "King, King, King," at him. Don't worry, there's a simple way around that, Ashlock replied as he manifested a large portal with a considerable amount of chi to keep it stable in the earth chi-heavy environment. Through the still slightly wobbling portal was Red Vine Peak, which lay just beyond the bubble. If Ashlock could make portals inside pocket dimensions, he could also make them here in a dimensional overlap. Tell the mudcloaks to go through the portal and wait on the other side, Ashlock told Douglas. Once they are all through, we can figure out what to do with them. Douglas nodded and raised his hands. Mudcloaks. By the grace of the Ash-fallen Sect's patriarch, you have been granted salvation. Head through the portal and await further instructions on the other side. All the 1,000 mudcloaks threw their arms up in the air in cheer, with most of them wielding a tuft of moss. They then ran through the portal and out into Red Vine Peak. Only when the last one had gone through did Ashlock cancel his dimensional overlap skill. The earth chi bubble collapsed, and it was strange to see two giant cliff faces be erased from existence while the raised slopes Douglas had made remained. It would seem the terrain didn't transfer. So that confirms I can't dimensional overlap the pocket realm containing the ink sea for a single minute and then collapse the overlap and be left with loads of ink chi. But that raised another question. What counted as terrain? Would a looted book from the Azure Clan library vanish with the collapsing overlap as well? What a strange skill with so many unknowns, Ashlock mused, quickly checking on his credits. Idolatry daily sign-in system. Day, 3,559. Daily credit, 7. Sacrifice credit, 1,653. Sign-in. That turned out to be a more expensive endeavor than I had anticipated, Ashlock thought as he gazed over the 1,000 mudcloaks curiously examining Red Vine Peak with their giant glowing eyes from within their black cloaks. But for these guys, a few hundred credits is well worth it. Now the question was, what the hell did he do with them? There clearly wasn't enough room to build rooms for them all here on Red Vine Peak, and even though Ashlock preferred them to human cultivators, he still appreciated his own space, so he would rather them be close but out of sight. I doubt they would want to live above ground anyway, Ashlock mused as his sights drifted to the 100-meter-wide hole that went all the way down into the mountain's depths. Long ago, he had thought of building rooms in the mountain for his sect members to cultivate away from the craziness of life. Alright, Douglas and everyone else, listen up, Ashlock said as he cast abyssal whispers on everyone simultaneously. The mudcloaks will live down in the hole, which for ease will now be referred to as the citadel. Have them build a staircase all the way to the top. For food, they can cover the walls and the obelisk in the center with moss, and assuming they drink water, they can drink from the troughs that contain the starlight lotus. Got it, Douglas nodded. What about housing for them? I want rooms created throughout the mountain linked via tunnels. However, reserve the top half of the citadel for our personal use, and then the mudcloaks can have the rest. Also, instruct them not to enter the cavern where Stella performs alchemy, and I have plants growing. Douglas said they were quite smart and could even make cannons. Stella tapped her chin. I wonder if I could train a few to be my alchemy assistants. Great idea. Elaine pushed up her glasses. It will be a perfect way to document their progress and intelligence. Stella turned to Elaine. Yeah. Say, why do you still wear your glasses? Do you still have problems with your eyesight? Isn't that something only mortals have to deal with? Elaine seemed embarrassed as she stepped back and raised her arms. No. Nothing like that. I just like them, is all. Stella squinted at Elaine and didn't seem convinced. Elaine glanced over her shoulder, and after confirming that Douglas was busy relaying Ashlock's instructions to the mudcloaks, she pulled Stella in and whispered, Douglas also said I looked smart when I wear them. Stella seemed even more confused. Why would that matter? You're smart even without them. Are they an artifact or something? Elaine blinked and gave Stella a knowing look. You might understand one day. Or maybe not. She chuckled and stepped away to follow the swarm of mudcloaks being led by Douglas, leaving Stella standing there, totally confused. Diana landed beside Stella and placed Kaida down. The midnight ink lindworm began to rapidly expand in size and soon matched Diana's height. Kaida lumbered over and rested his head on Diana's shoulder. She scratched his chin while looking directly at Ashlock. Say, Patriarch. While in the sky, I noticed something strange. Diana pointed to the east. Why is there a floating island with a demonic tree on it? That reminded Ashlock that not everyone had seen his new Skyborn bastion, and he had intended to make a new one out of the ink affinity tree. Chapter 217, New Apprentice. Later that afternoon, with the sun already nearing the end of its lazy arc across the sky, Ashlock gathered everyone on the mountain's eastern side, including Douglas, who had been busy with the mud cloaks all day, so he only had to explain this once. To answer your question from hours ago, Diana, this is a Skyborn bastion, Ashlock said through abyssal whispers effectively. It's a floating island controlled by either myself or the demonic tree linked to the bastion's core. Which, in this case, is Willow, who is a spatial affinity tree. While under Willow's control, the most it can do is float around as his star core is far too weak to power the shields or artillery for long. The what now? Diana squinted at the floating black rock that resembled an asteroid with a tree growing on top. Shields. Artillery. All I see is a floating rock. The bastion has a powerful shield and flowers that sprout from its side that can launch attacks. Due to Willow's affinity, the shield and the artillery flowers will use spatial chi. So what's with the lake of ink? This wasn't here last time. Stella had used spatial step to appear on the edge of the ink lake and crouched down to place a hand on one of the giant eggs that Ashlock had looted from the Midnight Inkwing's pocket realm. And what is this? Stella twisted her body to avoid Kaida, who rocketed past her and belly flopped into the ink lake. Hey! Stella yelled as she jumped back to avoid being splashed by the wave of ink. Kaida stuck his tongue at Stella as he lazily floated around. His body blended so well that it would be hard to see him if not for his golden eyes. I stole these eggs from the pocket realm Kaida had visited, Ashlock explained while suppressing a chuckle at their antics. They apparently belonged to a divine beast called the Midnight Inkwing, and after eating many eggs, Kaida also evolved into a variant of it. Does that mean Kaida is now a divine beast? Stella squinted at Kaida, who splashed her in return. If not for her using spatial step in time to avoid it, Stella's white clothes would have been stained. Yes, there is now divine blood flowing through that rascal's veins. Wait, he doesn't even have veins anymore. Or blood. Kaida is just divine ink taking on the shape of a linworm. Ashlock laughed. I only now realized how strange that is. So, what are you planning to do with these eggs? Stella asked while glaring at Kaida. I bet they taste amazing. Not sure, to be honest. Ashlock admitted. I was thinking of giving a few to Larry to eat to see if he also acquires divinity, and even if it doesn't, the chi stored in these eggs alone should push him closer to his next evolution. We could try and hatch one or two of them. Elaine suggested. Your thirst for research hasn't been satisfied yet. Ashlock joked. I saw you trying to kidnap a mud cloak earlier. I did no such thing. Elaine looked down and kicked her foot against the ground. I just wanted a little look, is all. No kidnapping the little guys, Stella joked. Actually, Douglas, how can you be here? How are the mudcloaks doing? I left them in Larry's care for a bit. Douglas laughed, but his eyes showed exhaustion from ordering around the mudcloaks for the last few hours. They are settling in and have already begun working on the staircase and their living area. Moss was also planted all along the walls, so they are good for a few minutes. So I came here to check out this floating island thing as I was deeply curious about it. Well, that's good because I actually needed your help making a second one, Ashlock told Douglas. You see that smaller tree that's sprouting out of the ink lake? Yes. I wanted to make an ink affinity bastion for Kaida, so I will need to move that tree and all this ink to a new piece of rock, which I can turn into a bastion. It will serve as a place for Kaida to cultivate and maybe even as a library since he gets more powerful by reading books. Ashlock explained, and Douglas nodded thoughtfully throughout. So this bastion won't be combat-focused? Douglas asked. I was thinking of using Willow for exploration and combat while this new ink affinity bastion would stay nearby and be used defensively. Ashlock said, so it will still have shields and artillery and capable of combat, but it will mostly remain here and serve as a refuge for Kaida. Got it, Douglas nodded. Does the shape and size of the bastion matter? Keep it under 30 meters long and 10 meters wide if possible, Ashlock replied, as that was the minimum size of a bastion, and any larger required more sacrificial credits. After you are done with the ink bastion, I would also like Willow's bastion to be outfitted with rooms within so someone like Stella can cultivate inside while it's traveling. Douglas wiped his brow. Okay, got it. I might need to ask some mudcloaks to help me, as this is a lot for one person. Is that fine? Absolutely. Ashlock replied, I expended much effort and resources to bring them back here to help you, as there's a lot of work to be done. Elaine interlocked her hand with Douglas's and smiled at him. Make sure to work hard, okay? Douglas narrowed his eyes at her. You just want to see what the mud cloaks are capable of, don't you? Elaine looked away without replying, but her face said it all. The woman's thirst for knowledge was as boundless as the ink lake in the midnight Inkwing's hatchery. Douglas sighed and released his hand from Elaine's grasp. With a grunt, he jumped onto the bastion, walked around the lake, and stood close to the demonic sapling. The sapling hadn't yet taken on ink affinity as it was too young and weak, but if it stayed in that ink lake for a while longer, it would naturally take on ink affinity. Ashlock could then use Skyborn Bastion to leapfrog its cultivation to the Star Core realm. Should I remove it now? Douglas asked. Ashlock gave him the go-ahead, so Douglas placed his palms on the ground, and the ink lake rippled as the sapling was pushed upwards. Once its small roots were free from the rock, Ashlock could pick it up easily with telekinesis and float it above the lake. Kaida, gather the ink in the lake and follow the floating tree, Ashlock said as he also picked up the eggs and began moving the tree and eggs toward the south. Kaida grew rapidly as he absorbed the ink in the lake, and once he was thrice as big, he gathered the rest of the ink in a swirling ball above his head. He looked bloated as he slithered and pulled himself forward with his two arms. Ashlock found a somewhat empty part of the mountain to the south since it was quite a long walk for everyone. He created a portal on Red Vine Peak, which Douglas and Kaida went through. Ashlock also sent his ints to guard the ink lake and the eggs. He would take the eggs and put them in his inventory or keep them close, but he was pretty sure their growth would be stunted if he removed them from an ink source. So heavy protection was needed. Chaos, Zeus, Titus, and Sol lumbered through the portal and stood guard in a square formation around the area while Douglas made a giant hole for the tree to be lowered into. Once the tree was settled and roots buried into the rock, Kaida spewed ink from his mouth and dumped the swirling ball above his head into the hole the tree was in to reform a lake. Douglas stretched his back and cracked his knuckles. All right, Kaida, tell me what design you want, and I'll make it. Kaida slapped his tail on the ground and hissed happily at Douglas. Clearly, the lindworm approved of being the designer. After thinking for a moment, Kaida began meticulously drawing on the stone with his claw using ink, and Douglas crouched down and inspected it. Occasionally, Douglas would suggest a change or ask for clarification, but all seemed to be going well, so Ashlock returned his sights to Red Vine Peak. During the day, while Douglas had been busy with the mud cloaks, Ashlock had spoken at length with Diana and Elaine about their experiences during the Mystic Realm. They had told him what happened to them at length, and Ashlock learned a lot about the 9 realms of creation. It had given him much to ponder concerning his system and greater goals in life. It also made him even more curious about Cain Azircrest and his potential connection to the Azure clan. With the others back, now was a good time to go and ask him. Stella and Diana, do you mind going and asking Cain Azircrest about his potential connections to the Azure clan? Ashlock asked the 2 girls. He decided to send both because Stella had a habit of causing problems whenever she went to deal with something alone. Sure, he wanted to speak to me about pills anyway, Stella replied as she summoned her sword and hopped onto it. Shall we fly over there, Diana? Feathered wings sprouted from Diana's back, and she nodded. Let's race there. She flapped her wings once, vaulted into the sky, and began soaring toward the distant white stone palace, leaving a trail of demonic mist as she went. Stella clicked her tongue. That's cheating. A portal manifested before Stella, and she rocketed through it. Once it snapped closed, it was just Elaine left on the mountain peak. Whistling to herself, she turned on her heel and began casually walking toward the citadel. What are you planning to do this evening, Elaine? Ashlock asked. Elaine froze like a deer in headlights. Just going to check up on the mudcloaks is all. She gulped, and then I will head to the Dreamweaver Orchid Grove to cultivate my illusion chi. Good plans, but no kidnapping the mudcloaks. You hear me? Right? Sure. No kidnapping. Stella ended up the race's victor and waved away Diana's grumbling about cheating and portals. You're just a sore loser, Stella laughed as they walked through the white stone palace and were shown the entrance to the alchemy cavern by one of the Redclaw youngsters. You have those majestic wings yet fly slower than a mortal bird. I do not, Diana snapped back, which surprised Stella. Mortal or not, no bird can beat a cultivator abusing portals like you in a race. What? Diana asked, seeing Stella's reaction. Something on my face. Why are you looking at me so weirdly? Since when did you get so passionate? Stella grabbed Diana's cheek and wiggled it. I want my monotone and dulled-eyed Diana back. Diana slapped Stella's hand away and rolled her eyes. I only spoke and acted that way because if I didn't suppress everything, I would let my demon form slip. But now that my body is in harmony, I have no need to worry about such a thing. Don't talk too much in the presence of the Redclaws. Ashlock's voice echoed through their mind, and the two exchanged a knowing look as they fell silent. Here we are, Princess Stella. The Redclaw girl that led them gave her a smile as she opened the runic hatch. Thank you. Stella took the lead and descended a winding staircase. The floral scent of the cavern hit her nose immediately, and her eyes adjusted to the dim lighting from the luminescent mushrooms overhead. After walking down some more steps, she soon came upon a platform still high above the cavern floor below where a teen with hair equal part white and crimson was hunched over a cauldron fruit ablaze with orange soul flames. Kane Azircrest, I heard you wanted to talk to me. Stella said while tapping his shoulder. What? Ah. Kane pulled away from the cauldron and glanced wide-eyed between Stella and Diana. The princess and demon in service to the immortal, he threw himself into a deep bow. Allow me to welcome you to the alchemy cavern. Rise. Stella crossed her arms beneath her chest. Elder Margaret informed me a week ago that you wished to speak to me regarding pills. Ah yes. Kane straightened up and parted his long hair. I was wondering if I could become your apprentice. Denied. Kane seemed momentarily stunned, but Stella didn't care. She had zero interest in taking on some apprentice when she wasn't even a master herself. She had recently picked up alchemy and found the twins Oliver and Olivia annoying enough. Why? Kane Azircrest's shoulders sagged. My cultivation has grown and is nearing the peak of the soul fire realm as I've been nourishing my nocturne with fire affinity pills, and I've improved a lot at alchemy in such a short time. He looked into her eyes like some lost dog. Am I not good enough? I just don't like people. Stella shrugged. I find them bothersome. Oh. Also, as I told Elder Margaret, I am taking a break from making pills to focus on my swordsmanship, Stella said. Could you teach me swordsmanship then? Is this guy an idiot? Stella thought as she glared at him. Ahem, Diana coughed into her hand to draw their attention. We also came to ask if you knew or had any connections to the Azure clan. It took a moment for Kane to recompose himself, but eventually, he faced Diana, not personally. I have heard of them before from the elders. Apparently, we descended from them or were some runaway family. The details are muddled as it's one elder's words against another. Maybe you should take him on as an apprentice, Ashlock said within Stella's mind. A dual fire and wind cultivator holds a lot of potential for destruction during the beast tide, and he may prove useful when dealing with the Azure clan in the future. What do you think? I think I hate that idea, Stella muttered under her breath. Chapter 218, Interlude, Cursed. Knox awoke to the chirping of birds and the feeling of sunlight on her arm. Ugh, she spat out leaves and soil that had strangely invaded her mouth and groaned as she pushed herself up. Even with her vision being blurred and her entire body racked with pain, she managed to sluggishly remove the twigs that had intertwined with her hair and threw them into the human-shaped ditch she had likely made by face-planting. Spitting to the side a glob of saliva, blood, and dirt, she lethargically collapsed against the tree she found herself under in a daze. What the hell happened to me? Knox muttered as she gazed up at the leafy green canopy overhead that was strangely distorted by a defensive barrier. Wait, a defensive barrier. She didn't remember deploying one. Her eyes widened as her brain kicked into gear, and the grogginess was pushed aside. Why did my expensive defensive barrier artifact activate? That should only happen if I lose consciousness involuntarily. Did something fucking knock me out? That shit cost me far too much to waste like this. Confused and angry, Knox dug through her muddled memories. I visited the Redclaws, ate some pills, got poisoned, attacked them, and then fled when I felt a powerful spatial array or cultivator inside the neighboring mountain. She remembered shadow walking throughout the night while suppressing the potent poison overwhelming her body. There was also that strange feeling that I was within someone's range of influence. So I kept running until I didn't feel it anymore. But then I suddenly blacked out after detoxifying the poison. Which was strange. Knox had never had trouble dealing with poison before. Closing her eyes, she tried to get comfortable against the tree's cold bark and looked within herself. What the foo? Her flesh was rotting from within due to the poison. There were also traces of a neurotoxic that she knew assassins from the Tainted Cloud sect used to induce sleep. But there was no way someone from her homeland would make the trip this far out just to let her live. They were far too brutal for that. So it had to be something else. Tapping the defensive barrier, it rippled with full strength, meaning there had been no attempts to kill her during her sleep. It must have been the poison, then. But why would it be laced with a neurotoxin? Knox wondered. Having secured her surroundings somewhat and tested the barrier, she dug through her spatial ring in search of pills to cleanse her body, which was currently rotting and in terrible pain. Knox ignored the pills Stella, who had been acting as a woman called Rosalind, gave her as she didn't trust the antidote to actually work. Instead, she located her personal supply buried among piles of clothes. The silver ring flashed, and her trembling hands manifested 3 standard 10-pill porcelain bottles. Popping open the corks of all 3, she poured the few remaining pills from each into her palm. The small collection of floral-scented pills was her last, and she would need to restock. So, with great regret, she began downing fistfuls of spirit tear pills. Almost choking herself to death, she barely managed to gulp them down, and while breathing heavily, she leaned against the tree. Cycling the concoction of drugs through her system, she frowned when the poison continued to fester even after an hour had passed. There's no way I need profound tear pills to deal with this. Right? How could Stella even get her hands on such a corrosive poison? Knox debated using the antidote Stella had provided for a moment but refrained. If she took in more of that neurotoxin and got knocked out again, she wouldn't wake up. Her body would become rotten fertilizer for this tree. Letting out a long sigh, she summoned a single profound tear pill that had cost the same as the fistful of spirit tear pills she had just gobbled down. The markup those greedy alchemists charge is ridiculous, Knox muttered. Opening her mouth, she threw the small red pill that had cost many golden crowns inside and enjoyed the floral taste before gulping it down. The effect was immediate as a wave of purification spread throughout her body and calmed her mind. It was a shame that she had been reduced to such a state where she had to waste such a pill, as not only was the cost high, but the supply was also low. It could be months before she could find an alchemist selling another batch of spirit tear purification pills, as the ingredients were rare, and most alchemists had contracts with prominent families to supply them first. As a wandering merchant, she only had access to the leftovers for an extortionate price. Or I could rob a weaker merchant for their supply, Knox grumbled as she rotated her arm to check for pain and was surprised at how quickly the purification pill had worked. Was that a high-quality pill? The ones I took in the past didn't work that fast. Looking within, she saw the wave of purification travel through her spirit roots without being as affected by the impurities there as before. It took a second for Knox to deduce the reason, but then she remembered that Stella had given her a pill that had permanently improved her spirit root. Feeling much better with the poison purified, Knox stood up and used darkness absorption to pull in the nearby shadows under the tree to heal herself. Wish Lucius was here. Knox grumbled. Her healing was inferior to light chi. Instead of taking a minute to heal the rotting flesh, it would take all day. I should get out of here. That powerful spatial cultivator could appear before me at any moment, so I need to reform my soul shadow as soon as possible. Knox had been at the zenith of the star core realm and had been growing an infant soul within her own shadow that, once formed, she planned to turn into a nascent soul and ascend to the next realm. Guess I will need to go searching for monsters to harvest their beast cores. Knox summoned her sword for flight and was about to deactivate the barrier when she paused. Something felt terribly wrong. As if something was growing inside her very soul. Knox's hand went limp, and her sword clattered to the ground. She stumbled back, tripping over a root. In a panic, she checked on her star core humming within her chest, and sure enough, there was a small black stem with a single red leaf blooming within. Knox had lived a long life, and few times in recent centuries had she lost her calm or been completely stumped by sight before her. She had crossed the vast wilderness, faced all manner of monsters and life or death struggles, delved into rifts far beyond her capabilities and been stabbed in the back more times than she could count. But none of that could compare to the absurdity of a literal sapling sprouting within her star core. Her very own soul. Small thorn-covered roots sprung from the black wood sapling. The feeling of having the roots caressing the edges of her soul reminded Knox of helplessly staring into that enchanting otherworldly eye while being eaten alive. Knox went into a full-on panic. She had no idea what to do, as she had never had something literally grow inside her soul before. She tried contracting her star core to crush the roots and the sapling to no effect. In fact, the sapling only seemed to sprout faster the more she tried to suppress it. No, 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 Knox shuddered as the roots spread out, unfazed by her attempts to control them. Her star core soon became overwhelmed with the thorn-covered roots invading every inch of her soul. The ball of blazing shadows was then breached as the roots penetrated her star core's outer layer and began spreading through the rest of her body. Knox screamed in pain as her ribcage and organs slowly turned to black wood. She had experienced pain before, but nothing like this. It was almost enough to make her black out on the spot. Her body instinctually mobilized her shadow chi to purge the hundreds of roots rapidly protruding from her soul. To her slight relief, the curse seemed weakened outside of her star core so she could force the roots to retreat and stop turning her body into a tree. Is this a curse? Knox said as she ran her trembling hand through her sweat-soaked hair. She was absolutely terrified and was struggling to calm down. Years of experience told her that panicking never helped, but it was hard not to when a literal tree was growing inside her soul. The sapling's red leaf and black bark reminded her of the demonic tree that had burst into flames behind Stella during the fight. Had the powerful spatial cultivator been the one to place this curse on her, is that why they hadn't bothered to chase her? Knox knew curses were far more lethal than poisons. If she could not suppress the curse within her own star core, that meant the curse was on par or stronger than herself. Therefore, her only hope was to return to the curse's caster and beg them to dispel it or find someone more capable at curses to remove it for her. Both were terrible options. One would force Knox to return to Stella and beg on her knees, while the other would be very expensive and expose her weakness to the world. Whoever she paid to dispel the curse would realize how weak she was and could kill her and rob her corpse. How had Stella known I would betray her? Knox muttered in disbelief. Had she slipped up somewhere? Had Hammond leaked the plan? Stella seemed baffled when Hammond attacked her and ripped off that earring artifact. So that seemed unlikely. The only other option Knox could come up with was that the Ashlock Trading Company had a cultivator capable of foresight, and if that was the case, she never had a chance in the first place. Her fate was sealed from the beginning, and she played in someone else's palm this whole time. This curse is no different from a leash to keep me in check. Assuming I can even survive it, Knox gritted her teeth as she desperately searched her mind for a solution. She had encountered curses before, but never one as delayed and subtle as this one. When had it entered her soul? When had it taken root? Her gaze drifted down to the ditch before her in the soil where she had woken up only an hour ago. It was the neurotoxin, wasn't it, that put me to sleep, Knox concluded. The curse must have begun while I was asleep. Upon that thought, Knox realized that unless Stella actually planned to kill her with the pill, there must be a way to survive the curse. Looking in her spatial ring, she eyed the antidote Stella had provided her. Summoning it into her trembling hand, Knox inspected the pill. She was no expert on alchemy, but she knew the floral scent and general appearance of pills she'd bought in the past that were used to dispel poisons, and this looked and smelled very familiar. She was running out of options and time. Although she could suppress the curse from spreading throughout her body with her chi, it would take constant effort. And she was alone out here in the wilderness, far from any demonic sects. Fuck you, Stella, you deceiving bitch, Knox cursed as she downed the antidote. The cleansing effect spread throughout her body and removed the lingering poison that her darkness absorption was working on healing. It was a fantastic antidote for poison, no doubt about that. But a quick check on her star core confirmed her worst fear. Stella had provided the antidote for cleansing the poison, not the curse. At this point, the black sapling had completely overtaken her soul. She wondered if she was now more tree than person as Knox felt oddly familiar with the cold bark she was leaning on. Knox felt her entire body freeze as she slowly turned to look at the tree behind her. She remembered finding it odd when she had arrived at the Redclose Mountain. It was surrounded by so many demonic trees that didn't let off any scent, and she had never seen any demonic trees capable of growing thousands of meters up a mountain before, let alone an entire forest. It was completely unnatural. Someone had put those trees there and was keeping them alive. Knox looked down at her trembling hand, and a horrifying thought crossed her mind. Had all those trees been people? Would she become just like them if she returned to the Ashlock Trading Company, having betrayed them? Knox thought back to that time she had met Stella in Slimer. Stella's abyssal gaze had been much weaker but had a similar effect to that eye she had gazed upon while being devoured alive by giant black roots, much like her soul was now experiencing. She had clearly messed with the wrong person, and whoever was behind Stella was far beyond her. If that was the case, Knox concluded that her only salvation would come from the otherworldly pills Stella had tried to sell her. She dived back into her spatial ring and ignored the weaker pills, going straight for the one stored in small, ornate wooden boxes. Summoning all of the boxes to the real world and scattering them in the mud around her, she cracked each of them open and attempted to remember what they did. I think this one dispelled heart demons. Knox remembered and consumed the pill without a second thought. To Knox's terror, a black, wiggly mass formed out of nothing but impurities gathered within her body and tried to claw its way out of her throat. Knox's screams were muffled as the monstrosity forced its way out. She barely managed to activate her shadow armor in time to avoid being devoured by her own impurities as it crawled down her chest. With a grunt, Knox grabbed the sword she had discarded on the ground earlier and disemboweled the creature. It faded like a black mist and was carried away by the breeze. Despite the horrifying experience, and after spending a few minutes to calm down, Knox confirmed that her body was now completely devoid of any impurities, and the bottleneck she had felt between her and the nascent soul realm had lessened. Yet, despite all that, the curse remained blooming in her star core. Fuck this. How is this curse so persistent? Knox was at a loss. Other than the poison pill and ointment that supposedly increased beauty and the pill that improved her spirit root, there was nothing else that she could see that would save her. Deciding to eat another spirit root improvement pill, she proceeded to cultivate until sundown, all the while suppressing the curse to the best of her abilities while thoroughly cleansing, healing, and improving her body to the best state it had ever been, minus the curse. At this point, Stella, I don't know whether to curse or praise you, Knox sighed. She greatly regretted her decision to seize the artifact from Stella and, in turn, make an enemy of the Ashlock Trading Company. The bottleneck preventing her from reaching the nascent soul realm was gone. Her spirit root was permanently improved, and she had even dabbled a little with the beauty ointment, surprised by the results. Standing up and stretching, she felt both amazing and, well, cursed. The tree within her soul made its presence constantly known as it tried to spread its roots throughout her body, and it had taken a significant amount of shadow chi to turn 2 of her bones and half an organ back to normal with darkness absorption. I think I now hate trees, Knox muttered as she glanced around at the leafy green forest she had woken in. It was now dusk, which meant it was time for her to hunt, as she had devised a plan to suppress the curse during her meditation. Using shadow creation, the shadows all around her rose into fiends. She also used night beast summoning, and the forest became alive with activity as all the monsters within a large radius became wreathed in her shadows and gathered around, awaiting orders. My shadows, go forth and hunt all the monsters in the wilderness. Tear them limb from limb and leave none alive. By sundown, you must return with as many beast cores as possible. The thousands of shadows acknowledged her order and took off in all directions. Meanwhile, Knox remained behind her barrier. Even with night approaching, she felt unsafe venturing out with this darn curse. A few weeks passed in meditation. Under the tree and protected by the defensive artifact, Knox remained seated as her shadows hunted for her. Piles of dull beast cores surrounded her as she opened her eyes and exchanged a look with her freshly reformed soul shadow. I'm sorry, Knox muttered. She had transferred the curse to her soul shadow during its creation. Her star core was now free of the black roots that had tormented her for the last few weeks. But it wasn't over. With her soul shadow now harboring the curse, she could not reach nascent soul without becoming cursed again. Therefore, she rose to her feet, stowed away the defensive artifact that had kept her safe, and turned her gaze to the east, where the tainted cloud sect resided. It was time to return home, gather allies, and research a way to free herself from the curse. Through any means necessary. There was just one thing bothering her. That can't be right. Knox's spiritual sight was picking up an enormous ball of spatial chi heading her way very slowly. Jumping up through the tree and perching on one of its branches, she peered through its leaves to the west, and sure enough, a floating island of black rock was on the horizon. What in the 9 realms is that? She wondered as she scanned the rock island that was sort of shaped like a ship. Upon its surface, she made out the silhouette of a few cultivators, and her eyes widened when she noticed the demonic tree ablaze with spatial flames exactly like the one she had seen during the fight. This bizarre floating ship most certainly belonged to the Ashlock Trading Company, and it was heading straight for her. Chapter 219, Tree Goes Hunting. Life had been busy over the last few days on Red Vine Peak for Ashlock and his sect. Douglas had spent 3 days tirelessly working on Kata's bastion. At first, the Lindworm hadn't seemed so sure about what he wanted as he still lacked imagination, having only evolved from a small grass snake within the last few months. So Ashlock had guided Kaida with a few ideas, all of which he loved, and then relayed to Douglas through a rather shabby drawing. Douglas thankfully had the skills to interpret the snake's diagrams and soon got to work. Since they had to wait for the demonic tree to acquire the ink affinity before Ashlock could use the Skyborn Bastion skill to propel the tree to the Star Core realm, the Bastion would remain on the ground for now. Douglas carved out a large piece of rock from the mountain like an iceberg similar in size to Willow's Bastion. So, to an outsider, it appeared like any normal part of the mountain. But Douglas had left a small gap around the future ship and kept it in place with a few stone pillar supports that could be removed when it was time to let it fly. The demonic tree and ink lake were no longer visible from the surface. All that could be seen was a hole that led down into a sizable hollowed-out area that contained the tree. Its canopy served as a sort of roof that blocked up the hole, only letting streaks of sunlight into the rest of the space. Within the hollowed-out room, similar to a cavern, was the ink lake where the tree grew, a dry shoreline around the edge, and indentations in the stone walls that were perfect for storing books. This space would be Kaida's library and cultivation space. Although not visible from the surface, under the ink lake was a massive chi-gathering formation that directed ambient and ink chi toward the demonic tree to speed up its development. Beyond the rounded, hollowed-out room was the ship's bow, which consisted of a meeting area. Since this bastion would remain defensive and always around Red Vine Peak like a floating island, Ashlock designed it with administration in mind. Other Sect members could work or wait to sign a heavenly contract with Kaida in this meeting area. Even with the ship hidden underground, Ashlock left the ints he had assigned as security and gave Kaida all the books, scrolls, and technique manuals he had in storage. The more knowledge the ink snake acquired, the stronger he would be in the future, so it was best to leave him alone and let him read for now. With the ink bastion completed a day ago, Douglas had returned to Red Vine Peak to oversee the mud cloaks, who were making good progress on the citadel. Since the mountain was 8,000 meters tall, comparable to Mount Everest back on Earth, the tunnel through the mountain's middle, like an apple core, was naturally just as long. Which said a lot about how giant that worm had been, considering it had formed this tunnel within minutes. Despite the fact there were over 1,000 mud cloaks that had been brought back, it would still take a long time to build the staircase all the way to the top and also extend the obelisk that went through the center. Despite this world's miraculous construction methods due to Earth affinity and the combined effort of all the mud cloaks, Ashlock expected the citadel to be completed after winter. The staircase Douglas had made previously was replaced with a ramp that went all the way up due to the mud cloak's short legs. The starlight lotuses had also been moved, as their roots had made the water taste bad for the mud cloaks. So now the obelisk was covered in the moss they had brought from their home. The moss did glow slightly, providing some light, but Ashlock also decided to grow some luminescent mushrooms, as there wasn't much sunlight that reached 8,000 meters down. Ashlock was absent-mindedly watching the mudcloaks hard at work through his roots when he felt something tap his trunk on the surface. His vision blurred, and he saw Stella waiting patiently in the morning sun. "Good morning, tree," Stella said with a smile. "There's something I want to talk to you about." "Stella, are you avoiding your new apprentice?" Ashlock chuckled. After some convincing on his part, Stella did end up taking Kane Azircrest as an apprentice. The two actually got on surprisingly well over the last few days. All things considered. Please visit https://novelnext.com website to read fastest update. Stella had spent a few hours teaching him the Mind Fortress pill recipe and had him practice it 100 times. Ashlock suspected Stella was so happy with her new apprentice because it meant she didn't have to make the pills herself and could offload all the tedious work to him. However, Stella still refused to let Kane come and see her alchemy lab in the cavern below Red Vine Peak and would only head over to the White Stone place when she needed to teach Kane a new recipe. Stella pouted, "You're the one who forced me to take him on as an apprentice. So it's not my fault if I don't want to teach him anything." She then gazed out to the east. "I don't want to sit here making pills. I'd rather train my swordsmanship and improve my cultivation." "Fair enough," Ashlock replied. "So, what do you need from me?" "I can feel Knox's presence out there in the wilderness." Stella caressed her maple leaf earring between her fingers. "I can tell she is far away from here but hasn't moved in weeks." "Oh." Ashlock humped. "That was interesting. Why would Knox not have moved in weeks? I wonder if the curse finally got her, and she turned into a tree." Stella's eyes widened. "If that's the case, we should retrieve my other earring before someone else gets it." Ashlock would love to, But that was far outside his route range, and he was not prepared to send anyone that deep into the wilderness without his supervision. He also couldn't send his int because they were busy guarding Kaida. Stella, it's too far. We have no way to chase her safely. Ashlock said dismissively. Tree, have you got wood for brains? Stella pointed at the bastion that was floating beside the mountain peak. Did you forget you have floating islands now? I didn't forget, Ashlock replied. He had totally forgotten that exploration was now a possibility. He had spent nearly a decade as an immobile tree where anything more than a mountain range away was impossible for him to reach. Tugging on her connection with the stolen maple leaf earring, Stella confirmed that they were now much closer to Knox but still had quite a distance to go. I can't feel the connection to the earring like you can, Stella, Ashlock said. So, you will need to direct Willow through the runic formation. Just focus some spatial chi on an area near the front of the ship, and Willow will direct the ship in that direction. Stella followed Ashlock's instructions and placed her hand on a nearby silver line, inserting some chi. She directed it to the left side of the ship. Sure enough, the whole ship began slowly rotating a moment later and heading northeast. What a coincidence, Ashlock said. It seems Knox is in the same direction as the area Elder Brent investigated and found a lot of berserk monsters that seemed to be running from something. I suppose Knox causing the disturbance makes more sense than the beast tide coming so early, Stella sighed in relief. Although the fact Knox is raising such a ruckus nearby is still deeply concerning. What is her plan? Why would she drive the monsters out of the wilderness and toward us? I have no idea, but it's a good thing that we have the bastion to investigate, Ashlock chuckled. It's just a shame it's so slow and obvious. If Knox is even semi-conscious, she'll see us coming from a mile away. Isn't that why we installed the runic illusion array? So that we could sneak up on Knox. Not how the array works, Stella, Ashlock sighed. It's good at preventing outsiders from seeing what lies beyond the array. But they will still see a giant floating ball of spatial chi. And perhaps the fact they can't see what is beyond it will terrify them even more. Also, there will only be enough chi to run the array if I take control of the ship from Willow, which I can do only once a week and during the daytime. Stella was about to reply, but the ship suddenly lurched forward, and she almost fell off her cushion. What the hell happened? Stella asked. You just left the range of my routes, Ashlock replied. So, the ship can only travel at 1/10 of its maximum speed. Stella knew the bastion had been slow in the pocket realm, but it wasn't until she experienced it at max speed and then a sudden reduction that she realized how slow it was outside of Ashlock's influence. You know what? I've changed my mind, Stella laughed. The bastion really does suck at long-range missions. You were right. This is a terrible idea. Ashlock had been concerned that he would lose connection to the bastion once it left his route range, but that was not the case. The bastion was connected to him through space, meaning it was like a small piece of his influence that could move around. The problem, however, was how small the influence really was. Without casting progeny dominion on Willow, the most he could do through the bastion was look around, talk to people through abyssal whispers, and maybe make some small portals. This was because the further something was from his trunk, the weaker his influence, and it seemed to also apply to the bastion. Hours passed without anything of interest occurring, and once the sun set, Ashlock fell asleep while the bastion continued its travels. It wasn't until late the next day that Ashlock saw something of interest, a literal sea of savagely killed corpses spread out for miles through the forest below. Expanding his spiritual sight and scrutinizing many of the corpses they passed over, he confirmed they all had one thing missing, their beast cores. Knox is trying to recover her cultivation, Ashlock concluded almost immediately. Expanding his search, he tried to follow the path of death to see if it would lead to wherever Knox was hiding. Of course, he also debated asking the elders to jump off and bring him the corpses, but that could wait. Now was not the time for snacks, and since these corpses were missing their beast cores, they would provide him far fewer sacrificial credits. Look over there, Stella pointed off into the distance. She was standing on the bow of the bastion alongside the red clothes and was using her artifact to track Knox's general position. Ashlock followed her suggestion and soon came across a random tree surrounded by piles of dull beast cores, and he could detect the presence of darkness chi in the tree. Knox was there. Chaos, Ashlock said to his ent best suited at assassination. Go kill her. The 2-meter-tall Wendigo wreathed in void flames emerged from the shadow of Willow's canopy. The pristine deer skull and antlers gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, and its hollow eyes surveyed the human standing before it. Stella and the red clothes stepped to the side. Chaos trudged through the gap while dragging its claws along the ground, making a screeching noise. Arriving at the front of the bastion, it silently vanished into the void. No, wait. Stella's eyes suddenly widened while gripping her earring. It's a trap. That isn't Knox. Chapter 220, Deforestation. A trap. Ow. Ashlock quickly cast his sights to the ground below and saw a thin black line beside the tree surrounded by piles of dulled beast cores. Chaos emerged from the tear in the void, and the apex predator wasted no time trying to slaughter its target upon Ashlock's orders by silently raising its void-coated claws and ruthlessly slashing down. The int's claws effortlessly tore through the tree like a hot knife through butter and shredded a humanoid under its shade. As the tree began to topple and through the shower of splinters, Ashlock knew it was a trick when no blood was drawn, and the humanoid dissipated. It had been a decoy made of shadows all along. Chaos glanced around in confusion, clearly noticing its master's orders hadn't been fulfilled. Suddenly, hundreds of shadow hands emerged from the ground and grappled at the int's limbs. That wasn't all. Ashlock hadn't noticed earlier, but no monster corpses were near or around the tree. Instead, many feral monsters emerged from the thicket of the forest, wreathed in shadows. They snarled as they encircled the snared ant, and a moment later, they pounced on Chaos. The void ant let out a silent scream as she enveloped itself in soul flames and cleaved through the monsters and shadows attempting to tie her down with ease. Thankfully, Chaos seemed fine, and it was bone-chilling how silently the ant could slaughter so many monsters in a flurry of attacks. But that wasn't the problem. Knox clearly hadn't turned into a tree and had even recovered enough to fight back and lay traps. Ashlock didn't waste a second, knowing of Knox's capabilities as an assassin. He activated Progeny Dominion. Progeny selected, initiating soul transfer. Back home on Red Vine Peak, his soul was torn apart, and a fragment of his soul traveled across space through the ethereal root network. Soul fragmented, damage to soul mitigated. Connection complete, time till sundown 8:30. Ashlock took control of the bastion, flooding it with his overwhelming chi, causing Willow to become a column of spatial flames, sending a shockwave of spatial chi into the surroundings. Ashlock felt like he was splitting his brain as he activated the spatial shields and flower artillery. He also made sure to power up the illusion array so if Knox was trying to attack them, she would have a hard time aiming or using Shadow Step. He also created a portal next to Willow and instructed Soul to step through the 9th stage Star Core realm and immediately illuminated the entire bastion as he emerged with his floating orb of light for a head. A brief moment passed, and other than everyone on the bastion suffering from a brief flashbang due to Saul's arrival, there was no sign of Knox, and everyone was alive. Nobody had lost their head, and there was no insane merchant aboard the ship. Letting out a sigh of relief, as Knox hadn't seemed to go on the offensive, Ashlock asked Stella, "How did you know it was a trap?" "Simple," Stella replied, pointing into the distance. "The moment cows left the ship to attack Knox, I felt her position shift a mile that way." "Oh. How did she manage that?" Ashlock asked. Chaos had crossed the void to appear instantly beside the tree, and the void chi coating the apex predator's body should have made the ent undetectable with spiritual sense. Stella squinted her eyes at Chaos as the ent finished decapitating the last of the monsters, likely some form of shadow step. She absent-mindedly suggested as her gaze traced the direction Knox fled, or maybe she left the earring under the tree and then pulled it to her somehow. That was a good point. It wasn't Knox they were tracking, but rather the earring. Granted, it was the earring Ashlock cared most about retrieving. But silencing Knox and stopping her from escaping with the pills and knowledge of their existence would also be ideal. Please visit https://novelnext.com website to read fastest update. Taking one last look at the felled tree that Knox had laid her trap under, Ashlock sighed again. Well, clearly, the curse hasn't fully consumed her yet. Or maybe it didn't even activate at all, Ashlock said. But the fact that Knox would rather flee than fight is suspicious. She must still be recovering her cultivation despite all these corpses, or perhaps she is still poisoned. The Grand Elder offered his opinion since Ashlock had been speaking to everyone present simultaneously through abyssal whispers. I don't believe that is fully the case. Knox is a merchant, and they have a different view on life. Usually, cultivators will fight to the death to protect the pride and reputation of their family or sect. Nobody will be happy delegating cultivation resources to a coward who flees at the first sign of trouble. But since merchants are not tied to any family or sect and roam the lands, They have much more freedom and will often choose survival over confrontation, if possible. That was some eye-opening information. No wonder Knox had fled at the first opportunity during the meeting and had no problems backstabbing her allies. This isn't fair, Ashlock grumbled to himself. How am I supposed to defeat an enemy that knows how to run away? The bastion was far too slow to give chase, but if Knox was only a mile away, she was still well within striking distance of the bastion's artillery. But was chasing Knox even a good idea? Could they win? The memory of her standing there unaffected as he tried to impale her with swords still lingered in his mind. Ashlock frowned as he felt a third of his total chi supply vanished despite the massive influx from his soul fire offspring. Is she dead? Ashlock asked the only person remaining on board. Stella shook her head as she moved the light beam slightly north. Unless we get away from the trees and into an empty meadow, Knox will always be able to use Shadow Step to avoid the attacks, no matter how fast they are. So even during the daytime, she's still so slippery, Ashlock grumbled. I suppose if I blew up the entire forest, she would have nowhere to hide. We could also have the red clothes burn the whole place to the ground, Stella suggested. But the amount of chi that would waste would be astronomical. Ashlock agreed. It was an inefficient hunting method, but what else could they do? He would send Soul after Knox, but the ant hadn't been designed for combat or really for moving at all. And if he had Soul illuminate the forests, all it would do would cast longer shadows that Knox could use to escape. To think the forest would become my enemy, Ashlock chuckled at his predicament as he powered up another volley of spatial bombs. These are getting expensive. I should regain some of my lost chi. Since the spatial storm spread out his influence at a significant cost, Ashlock could now cast portals around him. The best way for him to recover some of his extreme chi expenditure was to devour the many corpses littering the forest below, especially the pile of dead monsters cows had created, as those still had their beast cores, so they would contain a lot more chi. Ashlock used telekinesis to lift the corpses up into the air and to the bastion. He did this as it was far more chi efficient than opening hundreds of individual portals. Stella hardly batted an eye at the sight of hundreds of corpses drifting through the bastion's shields. Willow devoured some while the rest were dragged through a large portal that appeared within the safety of the bastion's shields leading back to Red Vine Peak. This was done because Ashlock didn't want to wait for his soul fragment to return to benefit. Plus 11 SC. Plus 7 SC. Plus 13 SC. Plus 24 SC. Plus 6 SC. Plus 30 SC. Notifications of sacrificial credits came pouring in, but with Ashlock's increase in cultivation, he noticed he was getting fewer and fewer credits for monsters that would have given him at least 100 only a few months ago. Snacking during a battle, Stella laughed and shook her head. What a glutton. Don't worry about me and my eating habits, Ashlock rebuked, just focus on keeping that light beam on target. The next volley of spatial bombs is ready, and the red clothes have already almost caught up to Knox. Stella pouted as a volley of spatial bombs ripped through the air and decimated yet another large section of forest. The red clothes narrowly managed to pull back to avoid the blast and even raised shields of fire chi to avoid being blown off their swords from the shockwave that made trees for many miles rustle violently. Not dead, Stella said as she lightly moved the light beam further east. She moved again in the nick of time. Maybe so, but she will be soon. Ashlock hoped as he saw how close the red clothes and cows were to the light beam's new location and began to charge up another volley. Causing deforestation on this scale made him feel awful, and he sincerely wished to finish this soon without blowing up the entire wilderness.